So, Access Philanthropy is a small nonprofit organization. We're based in Minneapolis, and as David suggested, what we do is we help organizations and foundations get their act together. So some of our clients are people like the Courage Center, the Youth Express, McKnight Foundation's Youth Prize organization, all organizations all over the map. So all kinds of groups. And basically our idea is to try to make sure that you know what you're talking about and how to talk about your organization, so we stress a lot of communications. And then understand what the pieces of fundraising are. And we say that there are 4 pieces of fundraising, and we'll go through that today a lot. One is communications with donors, and that will be our first session. The second piece is individual fundraisers. Individual fundraising, so that's like major donors and direct mail solicitation and things like that. We'll talk about planning for that. The next piece is institutional funding, which is basically grants. We'll talk about that in the planning session, and we will also talk about some of that at the end of the day when we talk about just grants in general. And then the last piece is infrastructure. What do you need to make sure that your organization, whether it's completely volunteer or whether or not you have staff, what do you need to have in place to support your infrastructure? And we'll talk a little bit about that after that. Before we do, I want to go through just some basic pieces of the workshop. I think you've probably seen this, but we want to make sure that if you have any questions about this, we can answer them right now. Certificate bonus points. That's David's piece, and so we'll let David talk about that, but basically our sense is that if you go through some of this, A, you'll be better prepared for the legacy grants, and B, they will like you a lot more. The workshop content, we've talked about this a little bit, communications for fundraising. That's everybody, that's first thing in the morning. Then the grant seeking strategies. Nancy will be teaching that. We'll be talking about that in the other room there. We will be talking about development planning, putting together a development plan and all the pieces that belong to that. And then we will be talking about working with the Historical Society and the Minnesota Common Grant Fund when we get back together again. Then this is the piece that David was talking about as being sort of different in here. It's not just today. We anticipate working with you throughout the rest of the year, basically until December. Now, we have asked that you will get together your piece of the homework sometime in June or July. But frankly, we anticipate that you won't do that. I work with adult learners all over the United States. Adult learners, when they have the opportunity, do not turn in their homework on time. And so that's fine. But the homework that you have is that we want you to either write a proposal, a template proposal, a basic proposal for you, and we will walk through that with you. You may have a great proposal, and so you don't feel like you need to work with us. That's fine. But if you feel like you could get some use out of talking to either Nancy or myself or somebody else on our staff to look at your proposal and say, is there any way of reframing the question, or is there a better way of doing the budget section, or is there a better way of doing the problem section? Fine, we can just look at that. The other group, the people who stay here, will talk about their development plan. And a development plan is basically, what are we going to do next year? How are we going to arrange it? How are we going to do the planning? That's a very, very basic piece for most organizations. Development staff really need it. Boards of directors really needs it, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But it's basically a piece of just planning. And we'll walk through that with you after a while and how to do that, what questions you have to answer. And we'll go through that over the next few months or over the next half year, basically. We did this for Northwest Area Foundation for a number of tribal communities all through South Dakota, North Dakota, and in northern Minnesota. And that was in 2008, and I still get calls from folks. And so we're pretty open to, that kind of information. And if you need information about a particular funder, please feel free to call, email, whatever. We'll get you the information. So the big piece is that we will have a continuing, we hope that we will have a continuing relationship with you. As David mentioned, we will have a statewide conference. We're hoping to get somebody from either the National Endowment for the Arts or the National, somebody from federal government who can walk through some of that stuff. We may do some more stuff on marketing, especially for historical societies. As you know, there are some really great resources who are working for some of the organizations, and we talked to a few people last week at the workshop, and we said, would you be willing to do a panel discussion about marketing, or would you be willing to do a panel? And everybody was pretty excited about that. So we're going to have a couple different tracks for sort of advanced work and stuff like that, and that time the Capital Campaign book will be coming out, right, David?
What's that?
The book on capital campaigns for museums, and aren't you guys doing a book on?
I don't know.
Okay, well, I got this information.
If the press is working on one, then great.
Great. Okay. All right. So there'll be other opportunities for talking with lots of other people. There will also be an online discussion. Now, I don't know if you want to use that or not, but it's there. What we're hoping to do is make that a lot more vibrant as we go through the summer. So we don't expect everybody to sort of engage, but we do hope that as we create the little cohorts all over the state, that people will begin to say, the Carl and Verna Schmidt Foundation, it's a very good foundation here, but they've changed their rules. You need to know that the deadline is now December 1st or something like that. Or does anybody have any information on the Northwest Area Foundation and their stuff on history? Or does anybody have a good resource for how to talk about this part of historical fundraising? Anything like that. We hope that you will use that. We don't expect that it'll become vibrant immediately, but we hope that people will feel free to do that. We also have an online database, and the database is of funders in Minnesota who are funding either arts, culture, humanities, or history. And the reason that we group those together is because we have consistently seen over the last few years, and particularly before we came into this workshop, we did a lot of research, and we found that people who say that they fund the arts, but don't necessarily say that they fund history, do fund history. So we talk about two different kinds of funders. We talk about published funders, that is funders who publish something that says we fund history, or we fund education, we fund this, and we fund that. And then there are ones that don't necessarily publish it, but historically they have funded history. Historically they have funded K-12. And so if we find a pattern of their being open to grants, we will also put those in the database as well. Because they've gone out of business now. But the Wood-Rill Foundation, has anybody heard of them? The Wood-Rill Foundation was one of the Dayton foundations. They've just gone out of business. They never said anything about history. And yet, consistently, they were funding 4 or 5 historical preservation organizations every year. We had them in fact, I think they still may be on the database, but they have been terminated now. They're no longer there, so we will update that. So there are published and then historical funders on the database. You have access to that. It's divided by region, and as you can imagine, some regions are pretty full, 40, 50 funders, and other regions 7, 10, so it really depends. But we also put in a lot that are statewide funders, and even those that are national funders. So surprisingly, somebody like Citibank does a lot of work with historical societies, historical museums. They're an interesting group. So we'll talk about that. And then, of course, there's just online learning. There's a database called the Moodle database that's the software, I guess. And Nancy will walk through with us at lunchtime. We'll talk a little bit about that and how that works and all the papers that are on there and the stuff that's up there. Okay? And then again, just the continuing access to us. Okay? Here's the database, and like I said, we'll talk about that later on. Before we go into the communications piece, I mentioned a little bit ago that not too long ago, when we were doing a workshop in Winona, and then we were also doing a workshop in Andover, we found that there was a heck of a lot of information out there that we didn't have. I mean, I've done fundraising for historical societies, particularly in Wisconsin, actually, over the last few years. But we decided, rather than to try to make this just a one-way conversation, that this should be an open conversation. And so we decided that we would try, in the very beginning, to try to get people pulled out a little bit about what they know about fundraising and stuff like that. So we're going to do a little bit of open discussion. Nancy's going to take notes so that I'm not going to write up on these things. But we'd like to go through these with you and say, you know, what are the great benefits for selling benefits for a historical society? What are the great opening lines for historical societies? And these are just a couple examples that we've had. What are some of the good funders for historical societies? Elevator speech openings. What I know I need to avoid when I'm doing fundraising. Great project descriptions for historical societies, and other stuff that I know about historical societies. So just a variety of different kinds of things that we want you to start the conversation with about now. Okay? So we don't have to start with any particular one, but if anybody has an idea about one that they think, you know, yeah, I've used that opening line for my letter of inquiry and it's worked well for me. So, anybody want to take a shot at that? It's only 9:25. Adult learners have a hard time with that. Let's see. How about funders for historical societies? Who are some of the better funders in Minnesota that you find that you can fund, that you can go after? Anybody want to share that, or everybody kind of?
We use most of our funders are individuals, and I'm interested to broaden from that. But it's our founders. They're still our supporters.
The individuals?
Yeah, through their own family foundations.
Okay.
So Minnesota Legacy Funds has been our biggest opportunity to move beyond our own very specific community.
Okay. What's your name and where are you from?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I didn't say that people should do that. So.
Catherine Kay, Directors Jewish Historical Society,
Okay.
out of Midwest. And we're based in the Twin Cities, but we cover North, South Dakota, a little bit of Wisconsin, a little bit of Michigan.
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Yes.
We have used, besides now local funding and NHS, we've used 3 foundations, the Carl and Berner Schmidt, which are wonderful. We have a local one, the Remick Foundation.
Remick?
Remick, and they're, like you say, mostly live in Cottonwood County.
Okay.
And then,
And I didn't ask your name.
I'm sorry, yeah, Linda Franson, Cottonwood County Historical,
Okay.
Minnesota.
Wonderful.
And then the third one that I came across, it's more for smaller events, it's the Crystal Valley.
Crystal Valley.
Yeah, they're a company that, you know, brings you out your propane or your fuel oil. And I got
Okay.
their newsletter, and here they have actually a grant with Land O'Lakes. And so, depending on the year, it could be 800. Land O'Lakes provides a match to, and so it turned out to be like $1,600, which for small museums, it's for a nice little project.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes.
Kim Janke, Brown County Historical Society. We find that our area foundations, and I know you can Google Minnesota area foundations, that we get local support through. We do several grants through them.
You have a new community foundation, a relatively new community foundation, right? The New Home Foundation?
The New Home Area Foundation's been around for a while.
Oh, it has been?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
There's
they've just
also the
affiliated with
Springfield
the...
area, isn't there a Springfield or Sleepy? There's a Sleepy Area Foundation. So
Okay.
in Brown County, each community kind of has their own foundation.
And how does the community foundation work with you? Are they...
Well, they're funding a large, we're doing our third floor to go to war project, and they're doing $25,000.
Wow.
So they do, actually what's happened is they have their 25-year anniversaries this year.
Uh-huh.
And so every so many years, they do $50,000 grants.
Uh-huh.
And this year they divided it into 3 organizations.
Oh.
And so otherwise you can get, for other organizations, I've done $1,000 grant, 5,000, you know, so I mean, for any they support New Ulm, they want mainly New Ulm, but
Mm-hmm.
this is a countywide project, so.
Okay. All right. Who else? Anybody else? Yes.
Yeah, we used Carl Schmidt Foundation, which has been with us too.
You're
Locally,
with
Lenny Tweeden, Martin County Historical Society in Fairmont.
Okay.
And the Fairmont Area Foundation has funded a lot of our things, and there's some local individuals that have foundations, the Rosen Foundation and Rosen Diversified Businesses.
Okay.
Been very supportive. I don't know, any others, Jim, off the top of your head?
Those have been the main ones the past
Yeah.
few years.
All right.
With the Fairmont area, we range from 2,500 to 25,000, depending on what we were doing.
Okay. All right. Well, as you go through those lists of funders that we have put up and that are accessible through the Historical Society's website, please feel free to add more information because what we have is basic data for everybody. But if you can add some more information and we can say, okay, and for historical societies, these groups don't do this or they have a matching gift program or something like that, please tell us. And frankly, I know some organizations are a little bit careful about who they tell about, like we work with the Dakota Communities, which is a developmental disability group, and with Hammer Residents, and they're a developmental, and so there's always this sort of kind of, should I tell? Well, the truth is, and I've been doing philanthropic research for about 35 years now. Funders who fund one thing within an area almost always will fund other organizations within the same area. It doesn't mean that the funding goes down. It just means that they have other opportunities for giving. And that's not only for institutions, it's also for individuals. So the chances are that if you're giving to the kitties and puppies, and she asks you for a grant for kitties and puppies, you're going to give her a grant, and you also give him a grant for kitties and puppies. That's the way American philanthropy works. And so we try to tell people that they should not be concerned about that sort of competition. It happens. Nevertheless, we try to tell people that that's the way it goes. So, any other grants? Okay, how about some good opening lines? What's an opening line that you've told somebody and you can see the glow on their face? You can see that they got it. If you use anything that's just in terms of just when you talk about the historical society that you work with, that something just happens.
I think if we just steer things towards the children and the education of children, that seems to be a good lead-in for a lot of major benefactors.
Okay.
You're going after children and their education.
Okay.
And the introduction into history seems to.
The introduction to history for children. And why do people find that interesting? What happens there?
Well, a lot of your donors are older people. They love history.
Yeah.
And because
They've been
they've
through it.
reached the age of being historic.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's a nice expression.
And,
That's a good
and
expression.
so, and
You're
they
a
also
historic.
have a certain place in their heart for children.
Yeah.
And so if you're going after that money for an educational program for children, such as our learning educational pod for children, it always brings a smile to their face, and they will open up your checkbook.
Okay. Who else? Yes.
We talk about saving stories and retelling stories because in the Jewish tradition, storytelling and memory is really important. So right now it's Passover, which the main festival is telling the story of Exodus.
Uh-huh.
So we talk about where generations connect to get the whole story.
Generations connecting.
Yeah, so
Okay.
we
Oh, that's a
use
good one.
split photo. We have a photo of a rabbi who came in the 1890s, full beard, hat, and then it's split with a young man's face.
Who also has a beard and
No, so he's, yeah, so we're saying you can't be who you are today if you don't understand whose shoulders you're standing on.
Okay.
So we start with, we're where generations connect to get the whole story, and then we talk about we're the only organization collecting these stories, and that this particular story won't get told in the larger story of Minnesota's history if we aren't collecting it, and then we go on to say that we're a tiny percent of the state population, and we collect it at a granular level. So that's, we talk about it as stories, because the minute we say history, they just go to sleep. So
Yeah,
we say
yeah.
it's stories. We
Stories.
retell the stories.
Okay.
And that keeps them awake long enough to hear the next part.
The next line. Okay. How about you?
Well, we used a theme, we had a capital campaign a couple of years ago, and my husband actually came up with this thing, look forward to our
You
past.
get it from all kinds of sources, huh?
Yeah, and so we
Connecting to
did
our past.
look forward to our past,
Looks forward to. Oh, okay.
and that's on our banner outside our museum.
Okay.
We're looking to make something. I have the same feeling about, I'm looking for a different word than history, and I love that connecting generations idea, because I've been feeling from the stuff that I'm retrieving offline or online, wherever I find something, that it's about the storytelling.
Yeah.
And because people will launch into a story as soon as you engage them when they walk in or if you see them in the community. But if you ask them, well, what would you do with oral history? I saw a face disco.
Really?
A guy in church, and so I've got to entice him, and I've got to go where he is
Huh.
and get that story.
So are other people using other things besides the word history and sort of to frame what they do? Yes.
I'm Laura Helly with the Hormel Historic Home. This is switching gears from the discussion, but my opening line that I like to use is either thank you for funding us last year, or thank you for the things that you do fund, which I know is X, Y, and Z, and I know are very important in our community, and here's how I see us fitting in that same. I
Okay.
think it just doesn't hurt to acknowledge that they're there for the good of the community, they're putting in their time and effort, and doing something important, and that you agree with them.
Donor-centric, they call that. And I like the spectrum of you're doing something for the community. We appreciate that, and we appreciate that sort of global sort of look at that. And we fit into part of that.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to what you're saying. You can't go in there and at least for me, I don't think going in there as we're way better than everybody else you're considering. I think
Yes.
if you do we fit in and we love what everybody else is doing and we're doing it too, and I think that just sets a better tone.
The truth is, though, that you do have a very unique position in the community. I mean, I don't know that you have a whole lot of competition in Fairmont for the work that you do, right? Is there a lot of historical societies in what you're doing?
No, we have some, I suppose you'd say, competition with other nonprofits, but it's in a different vein.
But what you do is very different than what everybody else does, and I suspect that that's the same story for almost everybody here. Is that true for you as well? Okay. And so I think you have sort of an automatic, unique selling proposition, and you have an automatic sort of unique position in the community, and those stories will be lost. And whether or not you're 25 or 100, you're going to appreciate that those stories need to be sustained within your community, I think. So I think there is something about that.
But we're also all in the process of redefining our focus too. I've only been in the museum for 10 years, and I remember just feeling that everything we do is about the 1890s, the turn of the century,
Mm-hmm.
or stressing how old our part of the state is, or our town, or our museum, or whatever, how old it is. And now we're bringing it up to the 1950s and 60s and trying to shake loose that history. And the State Historical Society of 1968 was doing a terrific job with that one.
Yeah.
My socks off. And so that is, we just talked to our board last night about what we're going to do in the parades. this summer, and they made me think about horse and wagons, and I said, no, we want a 1955 convertible, or a 1960 something.
Huh.
So we
That
had to change the way-
generation,
change the
yeah.
way they do it.
What was history for us is not necessarily history for our children. How about you?
I'm Laura Ressler from Steele County Historical Society, and we are just finishing up a capital campaign and in the process of opening a new history center.
Okay.
So it's a $3.3 million project, which started with the funding of a very generous local family that offered $1 million challenge to us.
Wow.
So we raised another $1 million. We're also very blessed that there's several family foundations in our area, and one family contributed $700,000.
Wow.
Yeah,
So
and a local
half of it-
foundation that gave $500,000, so a company that donated all the glass,
Mm.
and over 700 other folks that all chimed in and helped. So
And how did you frame the discussion about?
our theme was "It's about time," and so that's kind of the tagline, and then our new logo kind of incorporates
Okay.
that as well.
How does it, if you don't mind, how does it incorporate the time?
Well, I've got printed pieces in the car, I'll bring them later. But
Good,
it just
thank you.
shows some graphics of like the old and the new and the things that
Oh,
connect,
okay.
and then the clock faces into the word historical, and that. So,
My 5-year-old grandnephew, they're not teaching him how to read a clock, a circular clock. And it's unbelievable to me that they wouldn't be doing that. I mean, that was one of my big learning accomplishments, So,
but even with the new building, and it is this trying to, we always say today is tomorrow's history.
okay, all right.
So
Good to
how
have
do you express that? So even with the History Center, we still hear the comments, well, we thought it would look like an old building. Well, no, it needs to reflect now because it was built now. And also that we're gonna do a little vignette for the grand opening that shows, the late 1800s vignette, 1950s vignette, and then modern, what today is like. And then it's, the tagline on that is honoring our past, looking forward to the future. So it's just trying to educate people, it's not about all old stuff.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, so we're going to continue to come back to this. Nancy, like I said, has been taking notes. If you come up with other things, great. Somebody talked about the war stuff. We were in Winona last week, and I did a fast hands up, and 5 organizations were doing something on the Korean War. And I mean, it could have been very small. One organization was saying, we're trying to connect the people, the Korean War veterans in the community, and they had them do a whole big presentation about what the Korean War was like and why, it was the forgotten war and blah, 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 blah. Not blah, blah, blah. But who were talking about that? And so that was a very interesting thing. And I said, well, how are you doing? How is the tracking on that? And they said, well, what we're trying to do is tell people that there are, hundreds of children in our community who have never heard of the Korean War. They've probably heard of World War II, and maybe they've heard of Vietnam, but they've never heard of the Korean War. And here, their grandfathers have fought in the Korean War, and grandmothers probably as well, have fought in the Korean War, and we don't know that. So that sort of connecting to something that was huge at the time, but it's not. Anyway, so there you go. Anything else?
Steve,
Yes.
did you mention just the website that has these funders on it? Is it just through your website?
No, it's free, and David, after a while, maybe you and I can put that up and show people how to get to it and stuff like
You
that.
haven't told me. I thought I went there for a second.
No, we and you don't get it through the website, through the Moodle website, which is weird. We need to make that connection to it, but it's up and it's free on the Historical Society
That
website.
has not been revealed yet.
That is not necessarily
Stay
been
away.
revealed.
Okay.
And maybe David, or maybe Joe can help us. 'Cause Joe was helpful in trying to put this together, so,
Thank you.
sure.
Only Wi-Fi.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about communications. What's the important, and can everybody see? Okay. And does everybody have one of these things that says nonprofit communications on it?
And some say just communications, I don't know why, but they're the
Okay.
same thing.
Well, that's,
I can bring one
That's
by
neat.
if you don't have one.
Yeah.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's- Oh, did you? Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, these, I don't know why that is. There's extra. Oh, okay. That's-
Apparently, it's for the right.
Yeah. So everybody's good?
Okay.
Okay, great.
There will be another, this will also be online at the Moodle. And in fact, it will be a little longer. What we did is we said we'd like to talk a lot more about marketing. We'd like to talk a lot more about communications and some of the background of business and marketing and stuff like that. But we didn't think we could do that all in an hour. So we put a much more detailed one on our, and this is what we call the presentation, PowerPoint presentation. So you'll notice some differences in there. Okay? So the importance of good communications. This is pretty obvious, but sometimes we forget it. That as remarkable as you might be, as desperately needed, as unique as you might be, as wonderful as you may be, you've got some serious competition. Not necessarily in the Fairmont community for historical organizations, but people don't necessarily segment their giving that way. So there's you're a remarkable organization, but there are hundreds of thousands of remarkable organizations. There are millions of organizations that are desperately needed. And the only way that you're going to really, let me just give you a quick, St. Paul Central High School. It has about 2,000 kids. There's nothing unique about it. How many organizations do you think are fundraising inside St. Paul Central High School? There's 2,000 kids. They have the normal run of hockey and football and cheerleading and theater. You want to take a shot? How many organizations are asking fellow students for fundraising? Moms for hockey, or dads for theater, or, 12? 100? Getting up there. You're good. One for each kid. Yeah. Well, and to some extent that's true, right? I mean, every kid is looking for his own. 225 organizations are soliciting money for hockey, for Girl Scouts, for everything else in the organization. So 1 in 10, and that's in high school. So you can imagine what the competition is in elsewhere. So you're worthy of support, but unfortunately there are 20 million other worthy nonprofit organizations. So what differentiates us? What makes us listen to one and not the other? It's communications. It's communications. So there are 4 pieces to communications. We're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics that you have to go through, some of the content and structure of communications, some of the strategies that you can use, tactics and tools, and primarily in that, we're going to talk about the writing for fundraising. But first we're going to talk about audiences. Who are your audiences and what will they hear? Who do you want to listen to you? Who are you framing your message to? Who are you projecting out your organization? Those are audiences. We'll talk about that a little bit more. What will these people hear? What they hear comes under the idea of perception of what they are perceiving about you, and that's colored by their own motivations. So if you like children, then your motivation is going to be more towards organizations that are supporting children. If you don't like children and you came across that line, you probably get some blank stares. You know, most of us won't say, "No, I hate children," but they will. You know, you won't get that. So what do they hear is colored by perception and motivation. And what do you want these people to hear? That's what communication is. Okay, audiences, anyone who's important to you, beneficiaries, contributors, doers, your volunteers, your board, your staff, influencers, and oftentimes our communication is more directed to these folks, and we need to think that there are different messages for these folks. So the media, the program officers of foundations, wealthy people, competitors, regulators. So we need to think about a different message, a different way we want to communicate with each one of those groups. Any questions about that? Comments? Okay. Audiences. What moves your audience? What resonates, engages, helps your audience? What hurt do you address? We've already talked about a couple of hurts. What's the hurt that historical societies, historical preservation groups, what kind of hurts do you address? Anybody? Yes.
Loss,
Loss. Loss of what?
structures,
Loss of people,
the
structure.
end.
Okay, good, good. It's a loss. And what does that do for people?
I think it makes them gauge where they're at in their own life and what they need to do yet and what they didn't record that already happened. It kind of wakes them up to their own life and cycle and where they're at in it.
Mm-hmm.
It gets personal right away.
Okay, so it's personal and it's a loss.
What's meaningful?
What's meaningful for people. So the historical stuff that you put together, that's meaningful for people because they don't want to lose it, because it is personal for them, that it says something to them. Okay, anybody else? Yes?
I think one loss is loss of civic spirit. I think whether it's money or time or artifacts, I think when people give things to our museum, you can see that they enjoy getting that civic spirit and helping the stability of the community, and making sure that future generations will have these things. And, they really feel like they're doing something, that they're a part of it.
Okay. All right, yes.
And the time period that they live through and remember and want others to be aware of in the future.
Okay. So it's their time that's important. Yes.
We like to frame that as, what is the legacy you're leaving? We like to, not so much the loss, or to put it in a positive frame.
Okay.
Of what is the legacy you want to leave to the community?
All
What
right.
are the things, what are the values that our stories impart? So we try to engage them around this question of citizenship or participation, more in what do you want to impart to the next generation?
Mhm.
What is to be learned
Okay.
from these stories, so that we keep it.
So it goes beyond just the loss of
It's
some
like-
sense of emotional loss. There's
Right.
also a value loss.
Like, not to leave them at the emotional loss.
Mhm.
They come in with they're quaking and crying, but that they're joining something that makes sure this is cared for
Goes
properly
beyond.
and
Mhm.
is there for the next generation to learn from. So then we quickly say it's about providing a legacy, passing your values on.
That's
So
interesting.
So we move them from the sadness and, oh, this is too bad, and looking backwards, which we do in history, but we try to make them see we're forward-looking. We're concerned with the future of that.
It's interesting. We have been working with the Ojibwe Nation at Red Lake on language, on trying to preserve their language. And when we first got there, the older people always said, our kids were not as violent when we spoke Ojibwe. And I thought, it's old folks trying to justify, which is, we all do. But once the community of Lima, where everybody, the kids learned after 2 years, they did find that violence did drop off, you know, among the kids. So I don't know if it's they have a respect for that, or whether or not people just are more engaged with each other when they are learning something like this. But there definitely are values that go just beyond the loss, the personal loss of stuff. Okay, so what hurt do you address? What need do you fill? What makes them care? Some of their psychographic information, and this. I mean, there are people who really do go into this kind of stuff in terms of, we have an individual prospect researcher who really goes into this stuff. And I mean, she charges $250 an hour. But the fact is that, you know, these are the people who are going to give you $1 million, you know. And so she really goes into what their hobbies are, what their leisure pursuits are, what their cultures, their beliefs, their thought patterns, of course, their political giving is part of this and stuff like that. So getting information about who your audiences are and what they really like. Now, there are 3 types of perception. We talked about this a little bit. The physical perception, that's pretty obvious. Emotional perception, I feel loved, hated, blah, 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 blah. And then mental perception, sort of the universal truths, the values and stuff like that. All 3 of those go into anything that you do. When you talk about the loss of historical stuff, people are going to see that's no longer there. That may not be as big a deal for them. But I have to tell you that when I walk into a museum and I smell the smell of a museum, you know, for me, that's big. You know, I really love the smell of a museum. So I really get something off of that says, here I am in a place that really honors history, you know. So, and then the emotional perception, we talked a little bit about that, and then the universal truths, the faith-based, stuff like that. So we've already talked about those things. Now, I mean, this is the one classic perceptions piece that people have. I mean, there's physical, there's emotional, and there's mental. And I have to tell you that somebody talked about the positive, spinning it positive. When we talk to donors, this works, but not for money. This may work for you to engage with a donor, but this is going to produce money for you. So when you're talking about perceptions, you're talking about motivations and stuff like that, you need to think about the half full, not the half empty. And a lot of the organizations, the small organizations that I work with, oftentimes they'll say, we're desperate, we're going to close the doors tomorrow, you know, we're going to have to give up our collection, blah, 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 if we don't do something today, you know. That may work for a small number of people, which is why people go, well, it works sometimes. It doesn't work as a consistent message, and you lose your message as you go on. You lose who you really are, your values, as you go on, if you go for the half empty. Okay? So these are the characteristics we really must communicate. We must communicate that there is some urgency here. And I think that's a little hard for a historical society to think about what urgency you're losing. And the one thing that I can think about is the Korean War piece, and all these organizations are going, you know, these guys are 80 years old. They're not going to be around, you know, next time we have an opportunity to do something like that. We need to talk about that now. Not necessarily, but that's the quality of the organization. If I come up to you and I say, you know, it's a nice little organization. And you've just come off of watching a television show that says that this kid is going to die tomorrow if you don't, you know, send your $12 a month, you know. What are you going to say to me?
Other more worthy, or needs elsewhere are
Yeah.
more important.
The quality of what I'm doing is got to be very important. It's got to be very visible. It's got to be very memorable. I mean, that's the one thing important. You remember that comedian Billy Crystal used to say, "Oh, you look marvelous." You have to look marvelous. You have to look good. Now, that doesn't say that you can't say we're just beginning or we're just organizing ourselves or things like that, or that we have a long way to go. But you do have to say that you are marvelous. Whatever it is that you have planned has to be marvelous. Whatever you are right now has to be marvelous. Okay? It does have to be truthful. Now, we're talking fundraising here, so the definition of truth is maybe a little bit loose. But I do want to tell you one point about that, and that there is a difference between accuracy and truth. Okay? Accuracy says that you're wearing a shirt that has blue and green and yellow and maybe a little brown and two kinds of green in there maybe. Now, that's accurate. If I say he has a yellow shirt on, that may not be as accurate, but it's truthful. If I go and I tell you all the stuff that's in his shirt, and I do a whole paragraph on that in my fundraising letter, you're not going to listen to me. It's going to be really boring for you. So tell the truth. You don't necessarily have to be accurate about it. Okay? And the reason I talk about that is because of money. When people talk about their money, they say, we're raising $3.3 million, and we were up to $3.1 million right now, and we're having a really hard time raising that last $200,000. No. The truth is that you have raised $3.1 million, and the community has been wonderfully helpful to you. You don't necessarily have to say we're scared shitless.
We have been that.
Well, I'm saying is that you can, but there is a difference between being accurate, absolutely accurate, and being truthful. Okay? So be truthful, but careful about how much you have to tell people. Okay? To some extent, you have to be a little provocative. Okay? And why do you have to be provocative? Because that's the way people are these days. They are provocative. See this child? She's going to die. This is a dog in a cage that's been beaten. I mean, that's the kind of competition that you're getting. So you have to be just a little bit above there. Okay? We're not just a nice little historical society. We're not just a nice little community museum. We are something special. And you better believe it. Okay? And then this is the last piece, you really have to talk about impacts. This is what, now we survey 3,100 funders every year. And we also survey a number of individual funders every year. And outcomes are the big deal. Outcomes are the number one issue that people want to know about. We're all becoming consumers, even in our donations. Okay? There are still a couple organizations that can get away with not having the outcomes. Churches, for example, don't necessarily need to have outcomes. But for the most part, we have to have some sort of defined outcome. We have to be able to say, this is what people get out of this. We can talk about, that we avoid the loss. We can talk about the extension of values. We can talk about, the extension of history. But we have to have some sort of outcome. Okay? The conversation to a funder, institutional funder in particular, has to be about impact. So, essential nonprofit impact. This is the kind of stuff that you probably have, even if you don't know it. The mission statement. And we'll talk a little bit about the mission statement after a while. Central message. The central message is different than the mission statement. Do you remember what your mission statement is? What's your mission statement?
To preserve the items that relate to Cottonwood County, and as it relates to the state of Minnesota. Okay.
So it's sort of, we will do this, right? And as you say, we will do this, it's sort of like, this is what we want to do, right? That's the mission statement, is sort of inwardly directed. A central positioning statement, or a central message, is the message that you take out to everybody else. Okay? This is the reason why we're doing this, because we love our community, because our community needs this sort of stuff. So mission statement is internal, central positioning statement is external. And all of us use it. When you did the building, as you're doing the building, what is your central positioning again?
Yeah, it's about time.
It's about time. Okay. So you're saying you community have to be engaged in the time thing. So it's not necessarily about what you're going to do internally, it's about how you're addressing the external community. Okay? Key messages, we'll talk a little bit about that. Elevator speech comes out of the key message, that's always sort of a fun thing for us to do. Taglines, corporate brand, media strategy, and then this is sort of pervades all of this, and that's the unique selling proposition. Some people call it the unique value proposition. Nevertheless, whatever it is, it's what makes you different from everybody else. And then from these, we also have these sort of sidebars of audience identification and segmentation. We talked about that a little bit. And then all of this stuff pervades our proposals, our case statements, our press releases, and our brochures, and our ancillary information. We ask questions. So the mission statement, our vision statement, again, it's internally oriented, no more than 3 sentences. I would prefer to see, as a funder, I would prefer to see no more than 2 sentences. But I realize some people have, it's done by negotiation. The shorter that you can have it, the better. What you want the world to be because of what you do. What your role is in creating the world. We will gather this stuff. That's our role. And generally, how you will create that world. Not necessarily we're going to go door to door and ask people for their stuff, but then the central positioning. Again, it's externally oriented. It provides a universal message for all. It links to several different audiences. Okay? I think we're running a little bit late, so we're going to go. You should use your central message a lot. More than you keep your message, your mission statement. Key messages are just specific audiences or specific audience sort of applications. So we want fond memories, we want children to be happy and safe, we want everybody to be happy and loved by others, we want more money, but we want sort of key messages for specific people. Talking points. They require, well, let's go through the whatchamacallit. You have to elaborate with your key message, you have to tailor it to a specific people, and you use it for specific audiences. Do you know what, if you ever heard the story about, your board chair goes into a medical center and he's riding up the elevator with the foundation director, and he goes like that, and who the hell, Well, that's when you need an elevator speech. That's why you need an elevator speech. Is that when people aren't sure what else to say, they have a 30-second message that they can give to people. So you're shaking your head. What do you have an elevator speech?
No, but I want one.
Okay. All right.
I want my board
All right.
to be able
Does
to
anybody have
conversations.
their elevator speech? I mean, you probably all have something like it that you sort of all agree on, but you really need to have something that your board can say, this is what we do. Because you know that a lot of times, people know what a historical society does, but you want to have to go beyond that. You don't.
No, I think that a lot of people don't know what a historical society does.
Okay, all right. So
But my
you need to have
experience is
something
there-
that.
yeah, there's a lot
okay.
of gaps out there.
All right. So it's basically customized to a specific audience. It's the context of what you do. Access Philanthropy does research and framing to help organizations, connect with philanthropists. That's a very poor one. It's right off the top of my head. So it should take no more than 30 seconds, as much time as it takes to go about 3 or 4 floors up an elevator. The idea of the elevator speech is that you want somebody to be good with this, to understand but you also want them to engage them. So the goal of an elevator speech is to get them to ask another question. Okay? And so the elevator speech should not be, ask me again. It should be something that says, you're engaging me. I'm interested in what it is that you do. Okay? It's the lead-in, the differentiator. There should be a hook. You know, there should be something that is sort of intriguing about what you do, and there should be a call to action which says, I'm going to ask you another question. That's the sort of the call to action, is that you want something to happen because of it. Let's talk about this more. You know. Taglines. You guys have already talked about a number of taglines already. The value of a tagline is basically that it extends your name. If people don't know what Historical Society does, then you're telling them, this is what an Historical Society does. This is what we do as our organization. We'll go through a couple of taglines here. City of Lakes, does anybody know what that is?
Fairmont.
What?
Fairmont.
Fairmont? Is that right? Oh, okay. Well, it's also the city of Minneapolis, so there's probably a lot of them. Live United, does anybody know? United Way, yes. And this tells you about a bad tagline. Bringing innovations in health and learning to the global community. Anybody know what this is? This is General Electric. Now, how would you know that this is General Electric? There's no way. You know how much they spent on this? $27 million. City of Lakes works a hell of a lot better than this one does. So, Access Philanthropy, that's our tagline. It's know who, know how. So, anyway, tagline rules, there's a few things. Jargon is the one that people often sort of screw up, they say, well, we do this or something like that, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Medical societies are like the MS and people like that, that's fine, usually they're good. So corporate brand. Now, people sometimes they'll think corporate brand is the Coca-Cola logo or the Vikings logo or whatever. Your brand is not necessarily an identity. It's not necessarily a product. It is what you give off. Now, you can communicate what you want your brand to say, but it's a person's gut feeling. It's that perception and motivation that reads about you. So, if your brand, if you go into town and you go to the cafe and you say, what do you think the Fairmont Historical Society does? And 4 people say, well, it's a place where you keep a lot of old stuff. You know, that's your brand. You know, if you want to change that, you have to think through what kind of communication you're going to give off that says we're not just a place for storing old stuff. Okay, so your brand is the sense that people have about you or about organizations like you, and you have an opportunity to shift that by the way you communicate. Questions about that? Yes.
How do you assess your brand? You know, if I go into a restaurant or something and I say, oh, what do you think about the Pioneer Museum in Fairmont? You know, they know I'm the curator, so they say, oh, it's a great place, it's doing great. Now, how do you like actually assess that without getting the bias of them knowing who you are?
You ask a third party to do the assessment. When I don't know, when you did a capital campaign, if you had somebody from the outside come in and do a sort of a survey of things, you really get a lot more honest feedback if you have a third party doing that sort of stuff. My other way is it's called mother-in-law research. My mother-in-law is from Waterville, and she is tragically honest with me. And if she understands what I'm talking about, then I think just about everybody else does. You know, well, never mind. But I do think that there's a third party nature to this. Nancy, did you have?
No, I was going to say something like that, and then you said it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else on that?
This is probably not on the up and up, but I do like spying. You know, you just quietly listen when people don't know that you're there. Sometimes it's like in the bathroom stall, and people are talking about you. You know, I mean, you can quietly listen to what people are saying, and sometimes you hear some things that you would never hear any other way.
Mm-hmm.
So, and sometimes that happens on your site, but sometimes it happens somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. You have to give people the confidence that it won't be used, that whatever they say won't be used against them, and that's the positive of hiding in a bathroom stall or using a third-party person. But it is important to know what kind of message that you're giving off. I mean, that's important for you in terms of fundraising. It's important in terms of just what communications you give off, and to some extent what programming you have.
I would say one is use the internet. I mean, sometimes you can do searches and find out what people are saying on Twitter, on Facebook, in blog sites. We found out a lot about what people are saying about MHS that way.
And surveys, internet surveys, and offer a copy card or something if they participate.
At the end of this workshop, we're going to give you an evaluation form. We don't want you to sign it because we don't think that will give us an honest feedback. But we do want to be able to do that. And I think you could probably do that as people come into the thing. I don't know how good that is. I mean, people tell me that if you have a suggestion box or an evaluation card, that it's only people who really love you or really don't love you that fill out those cards. But nevertheless, I do think that it probably can give you some sort of a pattern. Okay? Branding, personality. Your press and your media standards. This is something that, I mean, we all know that we need something in terms of press or for external media, and oftentimes we say, well, we're just going to send a press release, we're going to talk to the editor, we're going to talk to somebody. You really do need to think about what sort of press strategy you're going to have. Now, the reason is right here, is that there is not just the print, there's also electronic. And I got to tell you that electronic press is a lot cheaper than it used to be. It used to be, and you still hear about, like it's $1 million for a second on the Super Bowl. But for example, you can do 10 spots on NPR, on Minnesota Public Radio, for less than $1,000. And I'm not suggesting that you do that. I'm just suggesting that the cost is going down there. There is, of course, the print, but the internet. I mean, do you know that there are more 65-year-old on Facebook than there are 15-year-olds? That just came out. That 65-year-olds are more on Facebook, or a higher percentage of 65-year-olds are on Facebook than 15-year-old kids are. Incredible. And then there's public, like signs and stuff like that. And we're coming back to this because people are responding to signs and not necessarily those big outdoor things, but some sort of signage. I mean, people are beginning to say that this makes part of my community. So, and especially if you're in a smaller community, that might work for you. Okay. And then the unique value and selling proposition. We all need to have this. It might be easier for a historical society to have it because, like I said, there's not a lot of competition for what you say. But you need to be able to say, this is what the unique value that we offer to this community. Okay? This is the thing that makes us different. There's nobody else in Fairmont that's gathering our stories. There's nobody else in Blue Earth who can tell the story of what Blue Earth is now to future generations. There's nobody. So, okay. Communication strategies. Strategies are just, this is part of the planning thing again. Strategy is just what you're doing and why you're doing it, how you will achieve it, and I think we might have okay, it's the effective strategy. So you basically outcome. We want 5,000 people at the picnic this year. Okay, so our strategies would include media coverage, and we might have internet, print, and public. And what are we going to do in terms of each one of these areas? It doesn't have to be very complicated. This stuff, this strategy stuff, not all that, it's not brain surgery by any means. But you need to have something in place. And the bottom part of this is, of course, is the who's going to do it, by when, and if you have the value to do it, what's the evaluations? What does success look like? Okay? Questions about that, or do people? Okay. Communications tools and tactics. So we're moving up a little bit here faster. Here are some of the emails, the tools that you have. Email subject lines. Crazy that how much of the emails are really dictated by those subject lines. So, social media, Facebook, etc., YouTube and other visuals. And I have to tell you, I just went through an all-day thing on YouTubes for cheap organizations. Basically, that was sort of the theme. And I came back with the sense that almost all historical societies should be looking at some sort of form of YouTube. You can do this on your camera. It doesn't YouTube, because YouTube and other sort of videos are so amateur friendly, you don't need to make it look like a Disney commercial. You can have it really cheap. And frankly, the two organizations that I was sitting with at my table both got their stuff from high school students. They went down, literally went down to the high school student, looked for the geek, and got them to do the video for them. And what one of these organizations said was a youth organization. They said, what do you like about Lexington Hamlin? What do you like about this? And they had just kids talking. You know, this is what I like about Lexington Hamlin, or this is what I want. You know, blah 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 blah. You can do that with diaries. You can do that with letters home. You can do that with all kinds of things where people can talk about what it is that they love. I mean, you have all these articles that are so visual, you know, and you have these letters that can be so visual, you know. I really strongly recommend that you think about having something to do with the YouTube thing. So, and then within written communications, opening lines. We talked about that a little earlier. Opening lines are, well, let me tell you that as a fundraiser, I know that you get about 8 seconds before people start falling off. 8 seconds. Not a heck of a lot of time. So you have to have something that's really intriguing at the beginning. And I teach a class in fundraising, and if anybody starts their letters with, we are a nonprofit organization, I say, that's a C. You know, at best that's a C. Because everybody knows you're a nonprofit organization, otherwise you wouldn't be saying it. You know, tell us something that happens because of you. You know, some sort of storytelling. We pretty much agree that storytelling is what we're all about. Text boxes and other visuals, we can talk about that in a little bit. Email subject lines, it should be short, 8 words. Should spell out an immediate benefit. Here's some of the coming soon jobs. Who is your best competitor? The magic of dynamic pricing. I mean, not necessarily for all of us, but it take 2 minutes to change the world. I sort of like that one. How to make the perfect salad. Well, obviously, you know, there are some. Are there some specific email sort of subject lines that you guys have used when you do email stuff at all? How about the home?
Well, the one thing I can tell you is when I stopped sending my newsletter as March News and I put like Peter Rabbit and blah 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 blah, find out everything in the March newsletter, you know.
So you started putting
some
content.
kind of personality,
Okay.
some kind of tease. Seemed to help quite a bit.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
A couple of years ago, we had the public arts guys up at our Chautauqua, and it was phenomenally wonderful. And we did our first YouTube with that.
Oh.
But when I sent it out, I put black bears sighted in the park.
Oh.
But I don't know how many more hits we got because of that.
Uh-huh.
But I had more fun doing it.
Well, if you had more fun doing it, there's a good chance that there are other people who had, yeah, yes.
Back to YouTube for a second. We filmed a fabulous woman cooking in her kitchen. And we put up on YouTube, we put up holiday recipes. And we can't believe how many hits we get on that. And it was simple. Her grandson set up the camera, and it's her literally in her kitchen banging pots. And just as you said, not big production value. But instead of thinking of a cookbook to preserve these recipes, and we find just anecdotal that young people in their 20s are going to learn how to cook grandma's brisket. So they're searching for these old recipes, but they're of a generation that's not going to go search for a printed cookbook.
They're not going to go to Barnes and Noble and look for grandma's cookbook.
But they're so used to going onto YouTube, that's what we hire. The kids use the net so differently. And so we will embed them, depending on the holiday, the particular month, in our e-alert. And so that's what our subject line would be, grandma's brisket. And then we get a tremendous number of hits. They love opening the video. So we have a YouTube channel that you go to.
That's wonderful. I really think that can really be helpful, yes.
I would say one thing on email subject lines to avoid or be careful of because of spam programs. Exclamation points are bad.
Is that right?
That puts you up in a higher. There are many things. There's little bumps every time you do something. Free in a subject line is like you want to get sent to the spam bucket. That's almost the first thing that you put in there. Don't put free. Avoid exclamation points are probably the big things.
The two things.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, thank you, Joe.
That was gold, Joe. Thank you.
Okay. Text boxes and visuals. What we call these are sort of reader reassurance points. And basically, when you're writing a proposal or letter of inquiry and you have these really dense boxes of text, you need to tell your reader that it's not going to be that tough to get through you. We'll talk a little bit about the readability stuff after a while, but if you can put in some sort of a text box, and it's so easy to do, you just put in a quote. You've seen these before, some sort of data or demographic. What we do on the first page of all of our proposals now is that we say the Youth Express request $10,000 from the Jostens Foundation for this. And so it's so easy for them to understand exactly what we're looking for. Make it easy for the reader to do that. We'll talk a little bit more about that after a while. We do tell stories. We did this thing for the Asian Pacific American community. They were putting together a health clinic, and we said this was Shanang's story, and that she had come across from Laos, and her kids became very depressed, and she was so we put like 3 or 4 of those stories there. You guys can tell those same stories, just a snippet from a diary, a thing from a letter home from World War II veteran, something like that just says this is what we do. Storytelling. No matter what you are writing, if you're writing for fundraising, you have to think of the story that's behind this. You have to know that there's a story here. And you are only really writing for one person. Okay? Don't try to write for 1,000 people. Try to write for one person. Heidi, is there somebody that you write to when you write to fundraising letters?
Usually do the fundraising letters.
You usually don't do the fundraising letters.
No.
Okay, you do proposals?
I send out e-blasts.
E-blasts?
To all of my members about upcoming events.
Okay. Is there somebody that you're thinking of when you are writing those e-blasts?
Not specifically, it's such a wide range of people.
Okay, all right. I don't know about the e-blast, but I do know that when you're writing a proposal, you're writing a letter, you're even sending a postcard, that you need to have some sort of visual in your head about who you're writing to, who your audience is, and what story that you're trying to tell them. It just makes it so much easier. And although it does eliminate, 99% of the people that you're writing to, you try to find that one central character that's there that you want to write to. Okay. Opening lines, we talked a little bit about that. FAQs and attachments. Oftentimes people in proposals or in letters, they try to add a lot of very technical information about who they are. And it really clutters up the letter. So if I start saying, these are the people who are coming to our museum, who are coming to our historical society, I may not want to have all that information in there because it makes me, as the reader, it makes it look more difficult. So what we do is an attachment. You say, this is what the membership looks like. And these are the things that, just 4 or 5 bullet points. Try to keep your letter a story. Try to keep the technical stuff in other places, in an attachment. Attachments, when people say, well, we only want a 2-page letter. Yes, 2 pages letter, but you can also add an attachment. Okay? Attachments are things that don't necessarily come in most proposals. So, okay? Reader reassurance points. I do some work for Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and for a couple of other foundations, and so I have to read a lot of really dense stuff, and I have to tell you that I get really bored really fast. And if this is the 5th proposal I'm reading that night, I can't stand it, and I know that as much as I want to be able to be as nice to the 5th person as I was to the 1st person, I know that that's just not going to happen. And I know, like the historical side, the legacy grants, how many do you get in a day?
Well, not per day, but just for fiscal year 12, so starting in September up until March 23rd, we got 481 proposals to read.
So if you're the 479th proposal, you better have something special, And one of the ways you do that is by having making sure that the readers know that it's easy to get through you. So white space, use a lot of white space. It may mean that you have that you can say less, but sometimes having less to say works a lot better. Text boxes, we talked about. Bullet points. Bullet points are better than numbers. And if you have a series of 3 things at any point in your proposal, use bullet points. Not just for 2, but for 3 things. Use bullet points. Not numbers, bullet points. Okay? Short paragraphs. If it's a 6-line, 7-line paragraph, it is hard to read. I will not remember what is in the 3rd line. I probably won't even read it. I'll read the first sentence, the last sentence, I'll read something that looks like it's important, but I won't read the whole thing. Keep it to 4 or 5 lines. An outline. Simple outlines. This is our story. It doesn't have to be numbered and all that kind of stuff. This is our story, this is our problem, this is how we're going to resolve the problem. Simple as that. Make it simple. Okay? Headers and footers. I like headers and footers. I like to know what page I'm on. Is this the 3rd page? Is this the 5th page? I remember reading it someplace in there. No footnotes. Do not put footnotes in a fundraising letter. Do not put footnotes in a proposal. You can have an endnotes. No footnotes. Footnotes make it look like it's a grad paper. And you really don't want foundations to be reading grad papers. Really. Okay? So as important as it might seem, don't put footnotes in there. Okay, readability, and then we're going to wrap up here. So readability is there is a tool that you can use. If you have MS Word, you just use the Word program. You can actually get a good reading on what you're doing. So MS Word, the review bar, it says spelling and grammar, right? Spelling and grammar checks, all writing assignments. At the bottom of the thing it says options. So when you see this discussion box, it'll say options. And we want you to click that, and we want you to assign show readability statistics. okay? Show readability statistics. And we do have a PowerPoint presentation on this as well, a PowerPoint presentation and everything. We have a PowerPoint presentation, and we can put that up on the website if you want, or if you want to remind me, I can send it to you. So, and this is what it comes out to, okay? It'll review your whole paper, your whole 2 pages, even just a paragraph, and this is what it will come out to. Now, here are the points that are most important. Words per sentence. Long sentences are hard to read. My requirement for our writers and for my students is 16 to 17 words per paragraph. Words per sentence, rather. The readability, passive, you know, and you know what we would like to have it done to us, you know, something done to us. You don't want passive sentences, you want active sentences. This is the most important thing. This Flesch-Kincaid grade level, that should be around 11th grade. What do you think People Magazine is written for? What grade level do you think People Magazine is written for? 6th. Exactly. 6th grade. Okay? Most direct mail letters are written for 5th to 7th.
Most what?
Direct mail letters, when you get a letter from the, you know, from the Conservancy or something like that, it's mostly written 5th to 7th grade. Now, for the foundations, we say no more than 11th grade. Now, that would indicate that most foundation people are juniors in high school. The truth is that it is modified by their motivation. Talked about motivation before. If I'm reading 481 proposals, I am not as motivated as I should be, as I want to be, and so I'm reading at a much lower level of reading. It's just what we are, just who we are. So we want you to write at an 11th grade level for, even though, you know, David has a master's degree. Obviously he can read at a much higher level. The question is whether or not he can make himself do that for 481 proposals. Okay? So we want you to lower this level as much as possible. We want you, if you have children, if you have a mother-in-law, if she can understand what you're saying, wonderful. That's really true. And Teresa's, she hates the work I do, but she will read for me, you know. And if she can't understand it, then I know that there's something wrong, you know. Or if she gets confused in the second paragraph, I know there's something wrong. So, yes?
Is that Flesch-Kincaid thing, is that a filter that we could run other narratives through?
Oh, yeah.
Online?
Yes, yeah. Anything that you do in Word, you know, MS Word, the word processing document, you can get a Flesch-Kincaid thing on. And I should tell you that if you do use a lot of bullet points, it's the one problem with this, if you do use a lot of bullet points, it will increase the number of words per sentence. So they consider, you know, you say, everybody has the option of red and blue, yellow and blue, orange and blue. It will include all those words within those bullet points as part of the sentence. So it does sort of skew the thing a little bit. But nevertheless, the grade level is what we're looking for. Okay? And we want this to be somewhere around 50. We'd like this reading ease to be somewhere around 50. Most children's books are in the 80s, except for, anyone want to take a shot at what? Dr. Seuss, yes, Dr. Seuss is like around 10, you know. Nobody gets Dr. Seuss. So at any rate, so that's the reading Flesch-Kincaid piece, okay. Questions, answers, comments?
I have a question.
Sure.
David, when you're talking about your proposals, do we electronically file the proposals under the same structure that we file our grant requests and when our final grants and all that? Because Joe, didn't you tell us that?
On the spot now.
Well, when he was saying bullet points.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Right.
You can do bullet points?
Well, one of the problems with the grant, yeah, is that there's no such thing as white space on the, with our application. It pretty much just collapses it all together in one big slush pile.
Yeah,
So it's a waste of
Except in
time.
the
Yeah.
in the time evaluation part.
It is there, by the way. When we go in the administrative, if we go into the edit mode, then we can see it.
Yeah.
If you bulleted it, and that's the way you pasted it in, so it retains that in one view, but you can't see it for some reason. So that's something that we're working on with our online portal, so.
Right.
bear
I mean,
with us on that one.
go ahead and keep doing, I mean, putting your formatting in. We do see it in edit mode. If there's something that's particularly complex, I'll go in edit mode and look at it so I can see some of the white space and the bullet points. And we're hoping that there's a couple of solutions they can fix in the future. Yeah, right now when you look at it, no paragraph returns, no bullet points, just one
Really?
big, it's awful.
And you have to be under those limits that they set too.
Yes.
So you're not gonna waste character space on exclamation points and bullets because you have to make one more point.
Well,
So that's the world we live in, right?
Okay, well, and I want to reiterate that sometimes white space is better than a point, than an extra point.
Not there.
But evidently not there, but in some cases, yes. Okay, all right, let's take about 10 minutes, and then people who are going to do the grant seeking stuff. Nancy, do you want to talk about the grant seeking, what you want to do with it?
Yeah,
We haven't had you talk at all.
I'm Nancy Frank Wilson, and I'm going to be down the hall and just to the right. So if you are a beginner.
First things first. Does everybody have one of these PowerPoints that says Development Planning Part 1? No. Okay, all right. The second piece that you should have is the thing that looks like this. It says Minnesota Historical Society creating a development plan. None of those. All right, all right. I wondered why. All right. So if you would pass that down and make sure, and then if you'll pass that. Now, there are actually 3 parts to this part of the workshop. There's the development planning basic assessment. There's the comparing yourself to others and piece that follows this. And then there's the homework document. The last piece is sort of the homework document. And again, well, we'll talk about the homework piece after a while. It should not be as intimidating as it may look. So we're going to talk about development planning. And development planning, thank you. As I mentioned, development planning is basically and for the most part, we see development plans be no more than 4 to 6 pages. Now, I have written development plans for national organizations that go over 100 pages. We don't expect that from you. We want you to just think about what it is that you really feel like you can put together. And what does a development plan do? Well, basically, it allows the board input. As you know, in the state of Minnesota, the board is technically responsible for the finances of the organization. I sat on the board of a small nonprofit. They didn't pay their bingo taxes, and I ended up paying $4,500 in bingo taxes. Me and every other member of the board. The board is responsible. Now there are insurance programs that for board members, but you are responsible for the livelihood of that organization. So they should have some sort of a say-so. They also, one of the reasons that they're there is to keep the organization alive and lively. At least in many organizations, there is an obligation to do some either fundraising or giving. There's an old expression that people don't use as much anymore, but give money, get money, or get off the board. And I do believe that if you aren't giving, to the organization that you're working with that there's something wrong. Something has been said wrong. You need to be able to do that. So the board involvement. Secondly, it creates a time-sensitive plan for you. And why is that important? Because unless you are the development person, it's really easy to put off fundraising. It's really easy to say, you know, we have to get this thing up, we have to be doing this program with the schools, we have to do this kind of stuff. We want you to have a time-sensitive plan, either by quarter or by month, but you have to have some sort of a time-sensitive plan. Okay? And the third piece is that you need to have some sort of evaluation. How do we do this year? How do we do during the last quarter? A lot of us say, well, you know, the picnic didn't go that well this year because the picnic fundraiser didn't go that well this year because, you know, we didn't have, you know, Martha helping us with it this year. Well, the truth is, it could have gone a lot better without Martha. If you had done some stuff and thought about what it is that you could do that would improve the event. So you need to have some form of evaluation that is really based on a plan that you already have. Does that make sense? So it's the board involvement, it's create a time-sensitive plan, and it allows you to have some sort of evaluation for the work that you have done. All right? Now, thoughts on a development plan. First of all, it's the growth of the mission. Okay? When we talk about fundraising, we're talking about growing the mission, or at least sustaining the mission. And we'll talk a little bit about the different levels of growth after a while. So what we're talking about is when you're doing a development plan, you're saying this is how we're going to grow, or at least sustain our mission. It has to be somewhat disciplined. It has to be systematic. Excel spreadsheets are great, but there has to be some sort of system. And there has to be some sort of conscious attempt to maximize the resources. This is sort of a long expression, but to maximize the resources of donors. So somehow you have to think about what it is that you're going to do to get more money. That's basically what that says. How are you going to get more money out of that person? We ask 5 questions. Who are we? Where are we going? Now, presumably, if you're the fundraiser, you already have a good idea about who you are and where we're going. That should not change that much, that dramatically. What makes us different from others? What are our unique selling propositions? What are the things that make us special? What do we want to accomplish and what do we want to achieve this coming year? Do we want to add a new program? Do we want to add a new floor? Do we want to add a new display box? Do we want to add more donors? Whatever it is, what do we want to accomplish? How and when will we reach our goals? So what's the methodology? And how do we hold ourselves accountable? This is an important one, especially in fundraising. A lot of organizations, it's just the executive director that's doing the fundraising, and that's very difficult to hold yourself accountable, right? Even if you have a board who is eager to help you, it's still hard to say, you know, well, I was doing the education piece this month, or I was doing this thing this month, and I didn't do everything I needed to do. You know, it's very difficult. So we recommend that everybody who is in charge of fundraising, whether or not they are a volunteer or they're a staff person, find themselves what we call a neo-nun. If you were raised Catholic, or you know people who were raised Catholic, you know that the tradition behind nuns are, you know, trying to slap you on the wrist when you don't do your homework or you're talking in class and stuff like that. That was a form of discipline for all of us. And I was raised by nuns until I got out of college. And so I know that there is a strong sense of discipline and accountability that I have to this day because I was raised by nuns. A neo-nun is somebody who can hold you accountable for what you are doing. So what we suggest, and some people call them a mentor. I don't think you need a mentor because I don't think you need somebody who's, well, they're hard to find these days. But so if you do the fundraising for your organization, who do you hold it? Who are you accountable to?
Well, my board president.
Your board president.
So
So
I feel
he's,
I'm responsible to.
and do you meet with him or her every month, every week?
Keep it up to date on progress as it happens.
Okay, so you try to have some sort of accountability to your board president. How good is he and how well informed is he about fundraising, period?
I guess he was a teacher in his former life, and so I guess I feel like he understands its importance.
Okay.
But that doesn't necessarily like to participate.
He doesn't like to participate. Yeah, see, now there's a difference between a neo-nun and a board president, is that board presidents, whatever you're doing, if it's working, hon, welcome to it. Yeah. And you don't want that. You want somebody who is just going to continue to say every 2 weeks or something like that. I recommend a telephone call with somebody who's a good friend who will hold you accountable. Or maybe not a good friend. I mean, maybe somebody who you can just talk to every couple weeks and who understands that, you know, if something happened at home, that's fine, you got to do it. But when is it going to get done? You know, who can ask that question. So is this not working well? Is this something that you need to share with your board? Is this something you need to do differently? You know, whatever it is, somebody who can talk to you every couple weeks and keep you on track.
Could be a donor.
Yeah, it can be.
Somebody in finance.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, as long as you can trust that you can tell them the truth. Because if you don't tell them the truth, you're doing the same thing you are to her board chair, who, you know, is just really not interested in the truth because he doesn't want to be involved. So if you have a donor who is interested and wants to be involved, but who, you know, isn't going to write you up for not getting the proposal in that time, because that happens. I mean, honestly, God, it just happens. You can't do anything about that. You make choices. So somebody who can hold you accountable and you can talk to every couple of weeks. Okay? And then, like I said, by phone, 15 minutes, a half an hour, you know. My sister, who is a teacher, is a good one for a couple of my organizations. She doesn't know them, but she enjoys getting involved in fundraising and she enjoys getting involved in developmental disabilities. And so a couple of our clients who have our developmental disability things, she'll talk to them about it, you know. And she'll just spend 20 minutes and she'll say, okay, so you didn't get the proposal done this week, when are you going to get it done? You know, she doesn't have any responsibility for the work getting done. She doesn't send them notes and say, you know, you screwed up this time. That's not her responsibility. All it is we want you to have somebody who's going to hold you accountable. All right? That's an infrastructural issue. Goes beyond fundraising. Okay. So who do you include? Well, governance leadership. You do have to talk to your manager about it. And unless you are the manager, unless you are the CEO and you're doing fundraising, it is very difficult to balance that. But it is the CEO's responsibility to do that balancing. To say, we're going to spend this much time on fundraising, this much time on program, this much time on whatever, outreach or education or whatever. And the difficulty behind that project is because what you want to do now, what you want to do today, normally puts off fundraising. Immediate needs and fundraising are always at odds, are almost always at odds. So the CEO, management, has to say, this is how much time we'll put into fundraising this year, this is how much time we'll put into fundraising next year. And these are the investments. And let me tell you that the difference between a successful fundraising organization and a similarly positioned organization that is not successful in fundraising is how much time they invest in new fundraising. If I go into an organization and I see that they have no idea about who they're going to be talking to next, no idea about going after new donors, no idea about new foundations, that is not an organization in good shape. They may be doing it right now, but they aren't looking to the future. And frankly, fundraising is about the future. It's about what's going to happen next year. It's going to happen when David says that the legacy group, someday, legacy money is going to fall. Somebody's going to find a political thing and it's going to fall. Somebody was telling me that Carl and Bertie Schmidt have changed, and there's been some shift in the Carl and Bertie Schmidt. How is that going to affect us? What's going to happen? That donor that gave you $1.5 million, it may be that her family says, next time, we're really not interested.
He just passed away, so we don't know.
We had that situation in the library where he promised, the woman promised that we would get $3 million. And when she died, the kid said, we don't like Wisconsin that much. we don't like Osceola that much. We didn't care for that. So we'll give you $1 million, but we're not going to give you what you had verbally promised us. So, all right. So management, program, and service staff. And why do you need the program and service staff? You need the program and service staff so that they will talk to you. Okay? They need to be able to, people who are running the programs and stuff like that, they need to be able to talk to you and tell you a couple things. One, what language should you be using here? Two, what are the goals and objectives? And three, what are the outcomes? You need to know the outcomes. And frankly, you can make up outcomes. It's really easy to make up outcomes. But at the end of the year, when you want to go after that second year grant, it's difficult not to know what those outcomes are. So you have to really want to go for what those outcomes are. And that's what the program and service staff people are supposed to be doing for themselves. Obviously, the development staff, whether that's volunteers or not, the development staff. And then finally, you should be talking to donors as well. We talked about it during the break. What do the donors think about you? How are they thinking about you? What are their plans? Who else should you be talking to? Are they satisfied with your growth? So a couple things to know: who are your constituents? Who are the people that you're talking to? Who's your audience? Who is your organization? What are your strengths and weaknesses? And what's the environment? What's the market for what you're doing right now? Okay, knowing your constituency, know about changes in your constituency, and know about what your constituencies want and need from you. That's important. What do they want and need from you? Now, it is great if you can determine what the need is and you can flow that need. So if the community says, we're not really interested in the Korean War, and you can say to them, this is why you should be interested in the Korean War, or we're not really interested in 1862. We have that wonderful cemetery there in New Ulm. It is just one of the best cemeteries in all of Minnesota. It actually has on there in the cemetery, killed by Indians, And I said, this is, you think that you can only find this in New Mexico or Colorado. And here it is what a wonderful piece of history that is. And I got off the track. Sorry. So what do they need from you? What are they telling you that they want? And what can you tell them of the opportunities that you are offering them? Okay? What's the current status of the organization? Let me go back one piece, and that is the changes in your constituencies. A couple of years ago, the banks all crashed, and people stopped giving, and people got laid off and stuff like that. One of the first kinds of organizations to go were arts and humanities organizations. We have a group of 60 donors that we stay in touch with 2 or 3 times a year, depending on what we need. And they tell us, and they're a pretty diverse group, and they tell us, well, we're not going to be doing much environmental funding this year. We're not going to be doing much this year. We don't like the idea of, of dropping the food shelf, but we have to do something, So one of the first messages we got in our first 2009 survey was arts and culture and humanities organizations were going to go. I gotta tell you, that same group, and I think there's only been a couple of changes in people, so 58 out of the 60 people that we talked to just in this last January, almost everybody who said that they had funded arts in the past is funding arts again. It's come back again. Arts and culture, humanities, history is coming back again. The reason is that these are donors who feel more comfortable with the way the economy is going. So I can't tell you, the average income, the range of income here in this group is from $50,000 to $225,000. So they're okay, and so they're going to feel okay about giving. But my sense is that that's probably the people who are going to make the most difference to you as well, are the people who are at least $50,000 and people perhaps up to 6 figures. So I think that we can safely say that your donors or prospective donors are going to be doing better this year for you, or have more potential for you than they had last year. Okay? So the changes in your constituencies, what I wanted to point out. Know your organization's strengths and weaknesses. What are the organizational messages? We talked about that before. Are they successful? What isn't successful? What are we not saying to our constituents? What type of fundraising has been successful? What kinds aren't? And what could be with work? That's the growth piece, okay? And I got to tell you that now this is, as David pointed out, this is our third workshop, and in both the other workshops, I asked people how many people were doing planned giving. And out of the, let's see, there are 35 in Andover and 23. So out of almost 60 people, only 3 were doing any sort of planned giving. So I'm going to ask again, how many people here have any sort of planned giving program? Oh my God. So you are doing, and the planned giving, is it a legitimate planned giving, or is it you mention it in a newsletter once a year? There are people who do that and say, yeah, I'm doing planned giving.
So we're linked with the Noam Foundation.
Okay.
Which is an easy buyout. We should be, our little organization ought to be doing more ourselves.
Okay.
Not
All right.
prefer giving and plan.
But you do have a mechanism for it. And
mine is more passive, but I finally got something, a whole page up on our website, link, and it's also directed to our foundation, our Foundation, to get more information.
okay.
But it's always on the back of my mind that we should be more proactive. I don't know, letters going out. I did mention it in my membership letter that always acknowledges a membership and that they can also become a lifetime member for $1,000, and you can contribute to as a plan giver to our development funds.
Okay.
Ours is a little more passive. We have, every year we've been putting out an annual report, so on the back of the report, we take anything. But we need to, make a little more concerted effort.
Okay. Yes.
This is probably passive too, but we just this year have a legacy brochure, new legacy of attorney's offices, financial planners, accountants, things like that. Is that?
That's getting there. That's obviously getting there. What I want to talk about, what could we be doing with a little bit of work? And so you've started something. Now what's next? Do you want to just leave it that way, or can you do something more? And I heard you say that you're working with attorneys?
Yes.
See, that's the number one way organizations start off with, is either working with foundations or working with investment attorneys. you know? So when I'm writing my will, and they say, well, you know, I haven't really thought about, and my God, that's incredible of how many people just don't really have a good idea. I mean, some people have, you know, I want to give to the school, I want to give to blah, 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 but a lot of people don't really have a good idea about it. They'd like to do something for the community, you know? Yes?
Financial plan, somebody I know had just been to her financial planner in Minneapolis, and they actually have a TV screen that features different nonprofit organizations because of that exact reason. People want to do something, but they haven't really thought about
Yes,
who.
exactly.
And you can sometimes contact these people and make your case for your organization to get featured, or leave brochures or whatever.
Yeah. My dad ended up giving benches to the golf course, to the municipal golf course, because he said, you know, well, you know, I go golfing with the guy, you know, and so somehow they decided that they were going to give benches to the golf course.
A couple of years ago, we hosted a meeting for financial planners and investment
Oh, good.
people.
There you go.
You know, just to get them thinking about philanthropy in general. You know, a lot of times you don't know what the results are till somebody does pass away
Right.
and you get notified. I mean, several times a year I'll get a call from an attorney's office, you know, somebody's thinking of blah, 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 but you don't have a clue. I mean, it's not anything you can plan on. You can just be grateful that people are thinking about you in some way or another.
If there if there are old parishes, well, I mean, you know, been around for 100 years, they have something of a plan giving program. Because the archdiocese and all the different adjudicatories are very good about making sure that their parishes have something. And if nothing else, going to them and talking to them about how they're doing it and stuff like that is one way of getting started. Community foundations, I find, are a really good way of getting started. Some of them are so new that they don't have much of a plan giving program either. At any rate, so what could work? I mean, there are other things like this, like major donors. A lot of organizations say, well, when you know, we do the one ask a year or something like that, or we send out an email alert, but we don't do much. So there's lots of new mechanisms that you could be doing. We strongly recommend that if you want to be healthy over the next 3 to 5 years, that you start a new mechanism every year. Now, I'm not saying that you ramp it up to the level where everybody is fully engaged and it's the priority, but you know, getting a brochure out there, talking to a few attorneys, getting somebody to talk to at the community foundation, those are things that you can do. So what types of fundraising are successful? What aren't? PBS does those phone-a-thon things. How much do you think they make off of those? What percentage? All right,
20.
17. So last year, the most recent one for PBS in St. Paul, TPT, they spent $750,000. How much do you think that they made off of it?
I'm guessing that it's contrary to what you would think, that it's not effective, there's just kind of marketing behind it on the screen. Is that what you're driving at? Or?
Well, okay, all right, you're getting there. So how much do you think that they raised?
I hope they made $750,000.
They made $810,000.
Oh my gosh.
And that was without staffing.
Oh.
That doesn't include the staffing.
Oh my gosh, that doesn't even.
Yeah, so
You know,
they lose money.
thing?
Yeah,
Oh, you know what? I don't watch PBS when those things are going on.
either does my wife. She's too
Every
much.
crappy show's on those channels when that happens.
Well, so either PBS is really stupid or they have something else in mind. And it's both. I mean, they know that they're losing money on these things, but they also know that this is the way to bring in new faces, new money. And frankly, most participatory events are about new money, new faces. The Minneapolis Heart Institute is one of our clients. Every year they do a fundraiser. They raise about $500,000, and it costs them somewhere usually in the area of $400,000. It's not a whole lot of money, but they are convinced, and I've never seen the actual numbers on this, but they are convinced that every table of 8 people, there is somebody who can give them $1 million. So the question is not whether or not you can give, whether or not you should run this kind of event. The question is, what do you do afterwards? And that's PBS's thing. What do we do afterwards? What do you do to identify the people who are there? So if you are not doing something that says follow-up, then your events are probably not working. Okay? So, what events aren't working? The events that aren't pushing you towards more money, that aren't pushing you towards a greater gift. Okay? So, what great personnel resources do we have? Do we have a board president who is good, kind-hearted, no doubt, has the attention to the organization at hand, right? I mean, that's all good. But if you didn't have to deal with fundraising, whose organization doesn't have that? Has somebody who really is tight with the fundraising and stuff? Yeah, not so much, right? Yes, and who of you would trust that your board chair would meet with somebody from the McKnight Foundation and do a really good job of it? You would?
Yeah.
Okay, well then good, then you've got somebody, okay. Does anybody have other people on the board, who not necessarily the board chair, who really you can count on to be out there and do this kind of stuff? Okay, so a lot of people do have good folks on the board who are willing to go out and do something. Can you get them to do it on their own? So we have a mixed response here. Without asking?
Well, are you talking about the loose cannon? The one who calls you up and says, hey, I got $5,000, you're gonna buy this. Yeah. Like it or not.
Right.
Yeah, you always have somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Ace Hardware store person in Osceola was the, every once in a while you'd just call and say, I got these books for you, or I got these subscriptions for you, So, yes, I guess not. So, what personnel resources? Do staff, volunteers, board, CEO, and I want to add one here, and that is part-time people. Because when we talked in Winona last week or a week or so ago, most of the grant writers, I mean, with the exception of like Winona, the Historic Center, the History Center there, and a couple of other people, most people had part-time grant writers. And we talked about what is the job function of a part-time grant writer. The part-time grant writer has one of two functions. One is that they write the proposal. They write the original proposal, and then they're responsible for doing the production, for getting it into the mail, making sure all the attachments are there, making sure that there's a follow-up, et cetera, et cetera. Or they don't write the original proposal, they just produce it. And you can get good production people who, once you have written the proposal, make sure that it's printed out, it's gotten into the mail, has the right name on it, it has the board attachment to it and all that kind of stuff, for about $15 an hour. Okay? And in some towns maybe less, but I know that in Minneapolis I can get a production person for about $15 an hour. And that just means that I select 10 foundations, I tell them here are the names of the people that you're supposed to connect with. I make sure that they call, verify the information, I make sure that then they put out all the proposal, that I do a cover letter. I do the cover letter, I can't ask them to do the cover letter. And then they make sure all of that is put together. And it normally takes an hour and a half. They can use our printer and computers and stuff like that. And then their job is to follow up by telephone and say, did you get the grant? Because that pre-call and that post-call can be very critical for some foundations, especially small family foundations.
What do you pay for a grant writer?
Oh, we pay Nancy $75 an hour. We do pay other people $50 an hour. And there are some people that we will pay $30, $40 an hour if we know that it's a relatively simple process. I know when I talked to the guy from the Dakota Historical Society, and he said that they had 2 part-time grant writers for $30 an hour. So, I mean, quality is what you get, you know, I mean, sometimes you just fall into it, you know. I have a lot of grad students that I teach, and so if they really want to learn, they'll come work for me or for one of my organizations. And I usually will charge $20 an hour for them, you know. So, and as a matter of fact, they have to work with somebody. They are required for the class to produce all those documents, all the content that we talked about before. That's their job for that organization. So that if you're looking for somebody, the next class starts in August, and we would be glad to try to hook up somebody. You know?
What college, what school?
It's Metro State.
Metro, okay.
Yeah, but the Metro State one is actually is on, the fall one is online, so we get people from all over.
Well, we use interns all the time for all kinds of things. I never thought for development. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, you know, sit down here for a minute. I do believe that part of what people have to do is get in the habit of sending proposals out. Get in the habit of getting their name out there. Get in the habit of figuring out why it didn't work, you know, or why it did work, you know. And so I recommend, even with our brand new organizations, that they try to get out at least 2 proposals a month. And the proposals can be just letters of inquiry with attachments. And small foundations are fine with that. Really small foundations are just fine with that. But that they get into the habit of doing that, and that they get into the habit of calling afterwards and say, why didn't we make it? You know, what happened that it didn't work for us? Because they are a private grant-making organization, they are not required to talk with you, but it is one of the ethics of grant-making, private grant-makers, that they will give you feedback. And the only way that you'll get feedback more than, we just ran out of money, is by calling them, you know. And believe me, that isn't an adequate reason. Because if they ran out of money, that's understandable, but why weren't you at the top rather than at the bottom? That's what you want to know. What do we do next time to be in the top 3? That's what you want to know, okay? And if they can't tell you that, well, then they're not really a good grant maker. I mean, so it is, you can ask, at any rate. So, resources, and of course, you know, where do we need help? Okay, God, we're going way behind here. Know the market options, know your prospective funders and donors, know what your competitors are doing and what's been successful for them. We talked about us being sort of unique organizations within our communities. However, you said there are other organizations in my community who are also doing fundraising. Who is giving them money? You know, especially who's giving the school money, who's giving the hospital money, who's giving the clinic money? Yes?
What we've done, because I work for several nonprofits, we go into other hospitals, clinics, and we take pictures of the donor board.
Yes, yes. God bless you.
And
I tried to get my library in Osceola to do that with other libraries.
And annual reports that list all, you know, like United Way has an annual report that lists every donor they have. We go through it, we just did a capital campaign, we highlight all the people that we personally know that we're going to personally ask.
You know,
That's exactly why people donate anonymously.
Well, and why more and more organizations
Like
are
that
not.
box that says I want to be anonymous.
And that's fine. I mean, we had one environmental organization that had 15 anonymous donors, you know, in the $1,000 to $5,000 range, you know, and only 2 in the $100 to $500 range. I mean, if you don't want people hitting you up for $1,000, of course you sign up anonymous, and that's fine. But just know that that's an opportunity for you. And And frankly, it does not diminish how much they're going to get. Again, we have been working for 30 years to try to figure out what is the dynamic here. And what we have found is that if I am anxious about the quality of my community, I'm going to be anxious about the schools, I'm going to be anxious about the cultural institutions, I'm going to be anxious about the sports and the youth organizations. I'm going to be anxious about all those things. And you are a vital, critical part of your community's cultural institutions. You are part, I mean, you are as important for your community as the Historical Society's museum is to St. Paul, Minneapolis. You are as important, if not more so, than the Walker and the Guthrie and the Minneapolis Institute of Art, because you are one of the few cultural entities within your community. You are something that other people will build around. You are something that people know is important for your community. So you're critically important. And if anybody has a question about whether or not you're grabbing other people's names, yes, because these people know that they have an opportunity to give or not to give, and they know that they have the opportunity to support cultural organizations in our community. It's critically important that you feel very comfortable in asking, and that you understand how important you are to the community. And I got to tell you that is one of the big reasons why board members are not really comfortable with asking for money. Two reasons in small towns. One is that they don't want to have to go around asking people that they know, and that's understandable. But the second reason is that they don't understand how important their organization is. They see their organization and they respond like Groucho Marx. You know, I wouldn't belong to any club who would have me as a member. You know, and I think some people say, you know, it can't be that great because they have me as a board chair. You know, well, not true. You know, even if the board is weak, the organization is still critically important. Okay, and you have to convince your board that. Okay. Okay. The four essentials: institutional giving, individual donors, infrastructure to support our fundraising, and then we've already talked about the communications and with donors and with prospects. So, institutional funders. What did we do last year with institutional funders? So, what did we do last year with institutional funders? What did people do? Did you write proposals last year? Did you guys? Okay, how many proposals did you write?
No, maybe 5.
5 proposals? Okay. How many did you get funded?
I think just about all of them.
Really? That's pretty amazing.
Did we do?
For the one, or I think maybe one we didn't get, but for the most part.
So 4 of. Okay. That's really amazing. What's the downside of that? Anybody want to take a shot at what the downside of that is? Risk. You weren't taking a lot of risk. Now, a lot of that has to do with how much time you have. You know, if you are, you know, doing everything, then it's very difficult to get. But the hard part of that is that you also weren't taking a lot of risk. You weren't trying new funders. Okay? So, if you can up that to 1 a month and make that other 7 low-lying fruit, but nevertheless low effort. You know, not a lot of energy. The common grant proposal or a letter of inquiry that you can write and add attachments to. I would take the shot to risk a little bit more in the area of institutional funding. So, who else? Who else? What did you do? Federal grants. I know you did the state grants. Most people did the legacy grants. Did you do other state grants? No other state grants? Okay. I don't know that there is any other state grants. I just know. How about federal grants? National Endowment for the Arts and Endowment for the Humanities. Okay. That's just crazy. Any sort of, you did?
One IMLS, yeah.
You did?
Boing, boing, boing.
And how did that work?
Very poorly, really, for the time invested. But
Okay.
American Battlefield did, so 2 out of those 3 in 2 years. But still, it was tremendously it was a hard grant first portal, so
Uh-huh.
we could do another one a little more easier, but probably won't.
You won't,
Yeah.
because it's just a hell of a lot of
Yeah.
work without a
Yeah.
lot of return.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's understandable, especially with federal grants. How about corporate sponsorships of any sort? Anybody doing anything with corporate sponsorships? Yes.
Well, we started a program called History Partners, but we was just, I asked my board members actually to try to cut time, that we would go after 3 to 5 corporate sponsors for $1,000 each, and they would commit a pledge for 3 years.
Mhm.
So we wouldn't have to be doing this every single year.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got one,
Hmm.
and, they're not doing anything.
The board isn't doing anything. Okay. And what happened at the
And
one
they won't
where?
go anywhere without me.
Yeah.
That's definitely very important.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, because there is a way of maneuvering that a little bit. But what worked on, why did the one work for you?
I had Rod Searle with me.
Rod Searle?
He's on my board and
Oh,
part of the legislature. It's very
yeah, I guess that's perfect.
And I'll tell you, that donor asked me to buy a business plan, which made me go online. And I think what he was really asking me was a development plan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's also an easy way for a business to put off a nonprofit.
But he gave us.
But he gave you the money.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
I think that there's a good point to be made there that in any one organization that you're asking, there can be the right person to ask. And it may be you, but it might be someone on your board, it might be somebody that works there, it might not be somebody that works there. I mean, it's that right gatekeeper
It
to
needs to
make
be the
the
person that
ask.
represents that organization in the public eye.
All right, so let's talk about that a little bit. There are always 3 people in this in this interaction. One of them is the prospect, right? I mean, obviously. There are 2 people from your organization. One of them is the storyteller. The other person is the ask. You have to have 2 different functions on everything. No one person, and I mean, there are people who do this, but no one person is good at both doing the story and the ask. And the reason is because nobody's reading the body language. I'm telling you a story, and I can't figure out, at the same time I'm telling you a story, whether or not you're bored with my story, or whether or not you're hoping that the time turns in 5 minutes, I'll be gone. You need to have the other person. You also need to be able to say, okay, it's time. Would it be possible for you to give us $1,000? Would it be possible for us to give you a tour of the museum? Would it be possible somebody to do the ask, somebody to do the follow-up? You have to have those 2 people. And I find, especially in smaller communities, that it is difficult to have somebody who is important in the community to be the ask. That person is normally the storyteller. And then you, as the executive director, as the paid person, can do the ask. Okay? And if you can't do the ask, find somebody who, on your board, or a volunteer, who can do that ask, who is sharp enough and who can qualify. I mean, to say, okay, it knows, the time is up, 20 minutes is up, we're ready to go, somebody's got to do the ask.
Okay, so I had a question about that, because John
Okay.
and I have been out in the community, and specifically, we've been to our city council, and that has diminished over time, so we know they're tired of seeing us, so we pushed our board for it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I wondered if the paid person should not be the person making the ask.
It is better if the paid person is not the person doing the ask, but sometimes in a smaller community, it's the person who is expected to do the ask. And it is, if I don't want to be asking my community members, because I sit on 3 or 4 different committees, I may be uncomfortable doing the ask. And so then we say, okay, that's the board member's job, you know. I find my askers are often people who have already been involved in fundraising before. The mothers clubs at the local school or at the local churches, I find those women are just phenomenal. They've done their time, and they know what to ask. And so the last capital campaign we ran, we took the moms of these tennis kids and we made sure that they knew how to do the ask, time them and all that kind of stuff, and how they figured it out. It wasn't as successful as we would have liked it to be, but I didn't have to be there, and I cost a lot. And so it was better for them to have the moms do the acts. So you have to have a storyteller who shares the mission, shares the story, gets the engaged, talks about, this is where the kids come in and stuff like that, has some sort of connection there. And then you have to have the business person. Okay?
Can we go, I don't want to step on that very powerful advice you gave, but can we go back 1 second about
Sure.
taking risks and submitting them?
Yeah, sure.
I write all the grants, and I have a board president who thinks, well, why are we paying your salary to write grants? If we have the money to pay your salary, let's just do the projects. And trying to explain that it's a whole different pot of money.
Yeah.
But I would find it hard to explain why I'm shooting 2 grants out every month and only hitting 50%. Right now, it's maybe 2 out of 10 I submit don't get funded. So
So you've established a good percentage.
yeah, I'm
How do
pretty
you do that?
conservative of what we
Yeah,
do.
that's really good.
And like, I've gotten 6 legacy grants, which is unheard of. Joe, plug your ears, because I hope to get 2 more.
I'll step in the room.
But so, I would be afraid to just start knocking them out. I wouldn't want to be reporting that to the board. I would maybe
understand.
start a letter of inquiry process, but I would not be informing the board until it went to the stage of, yes, we welcome a grant submission. And then I prepare a grant strategy each year during the time we're doing budget. So as we're thinking of upcoming projects, when we're meeting with budget, I'm saying, I think I have a good chance on this, or I have a good chance on that. So we do it together. So almost a year ahead, I'm thinking of my grant strategy.
No, that's good. That's very good.
But I'm thinking that I could, listening to you, maybe do an informal, just for myself, this letter of inquiry kind of strategy. I don't think I'd be telling them until I really felt more confident that it's the right grant to try for, and we have a good chance to get it, and I can justify. Those legacy grants take me 40 hours to write.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't sit and do it for 40 hours, but over the time.
Of course.
It's 40 hours, so I have to justify that I'm going to get
Taking all that time. I would suggest that the letter of inquiry is probably your best shot.
But more, but I think I'm not going to be sharing that I'm writing 2 letters of inquiry every month.
Well, the other side of it is that it is, on average, we lose about 20% of our old money every year. So what you're doing by expanding the base of people that you're talking to is just insurance money. So, and that's both individual and institutional. And so yes, if you feel uncomfortable, just call it insurance money. This is just insurance program that you have that says, and in case they want to grow the organization, they're going to have to go, you don't want them starting from scratch. Starting from scratch in a fundraising program is very difficult, especially with institutions. So you do want them to know who's out there. And so if you want to expand, who's out there? If you lose a big grant, if you don't get the legacy grant, who's out there and who knows about you? And so I would send the letters of inquiry. And God knows there must be a good 50 good-sized family Jewish family foundations in the Twin Cities. that you could go after and just ask for a cup of coffee.
So I think what I'm hearing is I would frame it with the board, is this is an insurance effort. that they're
Yes.
making, and that they're not gonna see the kind of return
Of course
that
not.
they're making on the others.
Right.
Okay, I like,
Right.
I like framing.
And you would expect no more than 10 to 20% return on investment in the first year.
Okay.
It's the, once you've submitted that proposal, or once you've made that relationship firm, then you can start talking about a higher level of understanding. When we do prospects for somebody, we say, we won't take anybody that we don't think has at least a 1 in 3 chance, But then once we do that, we, especially with newer organizations, we say, well, 40% chance, 50% chance of, then we'll go for that. Because you do have to grow, especially when you're a small organization.
Thank you.
Sure. Anybody else on that? Okay. So, in terms of, you do have to do the outreach, that you do have to do the new stuff. I think we talked about that, new funders, this is one of those clever things that fundraisers talk about all the time. The why have you forsaken us? Who has dropped out? Especially who has dropped out more than 3 years ago? Because if they just dropped out last year, you should go back to them. But you can understand if they say, well, we've been giving to you for 50 years now, blah, 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 blah. But they haven't funded you in a couple of years, things have changed. They may have missed you. They may have had some sort of miscommunication. You may have had some sort of miscommunication. And after all, a lot of them say, this is the only time we're going to fund you, and they don't mean it. Martin and Brown, it's a small, relatively new foundation. Our volunteer lawyers group went after them, called them up, and she said, no, we say right on our website that we don't accept unsolicited applications. Why do you think you have the, blah, 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 blah. And she said, well, because our consultant, Paprocki, told us to, and which is fine with me. I mean, if you want to tell anybody that Paprocki told you to call, that's fine with me. I'm the bad guy in a lot of those relationships. And she said, well, okay, so you can send me something. They sent something. They got $10,000 from the Martin and Brown Foundation. The next year, the woman from the Volunteer Lawyers Network said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go for that. So she didn't. And guess what? In December, she called, Mrs. Martin called, and she said, we didn't hear from you this year. And she said, well, we thought that was the end of the relationship. And she said, just send me something, And I know a lot of small family foundations who, they give off this gruffness, but they really aren't all that interested, I mean, you see in the list, and you'll see on our database that a lot of organizations, a lot of foundations say we do not accept pre-selected organizations only. We don't accept proposals. Well, the truth is they don't accept proposals, which are 10-page, 50-page, 100-page proposals. They will accept a letter of inquiry. There's a big difference in the mind of donors between a 2-page letter and a formal proposal. A 2-page letter gives me, as the donor, the opportunity to say yes or no. A proposal says, I better read you because you went through all this work to do this for me. Send the 2-page letter, and in the 2-page letter, talk about who you are, what you want from them, but give them the opportunity to say no. And you give them that by saying, we would like to meet with you, or I would like to be able to present a full proposal, or a 10-page proposal, or an 8-page proposal, or something like that. Would you be open to that? I will call you in the next couple weeks to talk to you about that. Don't let them call you. They won't. Okay? And it's the biggest problem that I have with my students, is that they always in their letters, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. No, because they're not going to call you. Really, they aren't. I barely open fundraising letters, much less read the damn thing, much less call them, and I'm certainly not going to call them if I'm going to turn them down, And the only thing that you're doing really is getting your name out there. So, send them a letter, 2 pages, maybe with an attachment or 2, and then say, I will call you back. We would like to talk with you. You know, would you like to have coffee? Would you like to see the museum? Would you like to talk about a special project that we think you'd be interested in? Something that engages them. Now, when you're writing one of these letters of inquiry, and it says, it's printed, Dear Ethel Longstreet, you know, and it's in the Calibri or whatever, you know. What you want to do is that you want to cross that off, even though you printed it that way, and say, Mrs. Longstreet. Okay? You want to personalize it that way. Even a letter of inquiry, you personalize it that way. And if you can do that with your direct mail letters, do that as well. Okay? Now, at the bottom, where it says sincerely, blah, 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 you want to add a PS. Handwritten PS. Now, if you're doing 1,000 letters, it's difficult to add a PS. What you can do is you can use a font that looks like it's handwritten, and at least you've changed the font, you know. But if you're not doing that, send a PS. Love to have you show you around the museum. Love to show you our Korean War exhibit. Love to show you, you know, the museum or whatever. Okay, we're getting this single here. So we will go through the rest of this after lunch. Okay. Any questions up to this point? Yes.
I do, but on board response to fundraisers, like low output. So, but we can cover that later. Linda, you probably have the same thing. 25%. Ouch.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Whenever you're ready. We had a good lunch. Very good. You stay awake. It's kind of hard. So before we get back at it, let me just a couple of resources. We mentioned this book in the workbook that you have. Is your museum grant ready? And this is the book that David really feels is one of the best books for fundraising for historical societies and museums. It's very basic, and you could use it for your school if you just scratch out the word museum and put school in there. So it's pretty basic, but it's a good book, and there's a lot of good resources in there and stuff like that. I think I bought this used on Amazon. I think it was like $7. So don't buy it new. It hasn't changed any. So if you're gonna buy it, get it. And then I put some of my business cards in the back there. You know, if you go on the website, it'll tell you how to get a hold of us and stuff like that. But it's just as soon that you just write to me directly and write to Nancy. She's got business cards as well. So I'm going to leave a few up here, and then there's a bunch back there as well. And I'll write up here. It's relatively simple. Steve at Access, and none of it is case sensitive. Philanthropy.com. Not a .org, we're a .com. So feel free, and our telephone number is on there as well. So, and we will we'll deal with this a little bit later. But I did want you to see that that we did find the place on the Minnesota Historical Society webpage where you can get access to all these funders, and we'll go into a little more detail about it after a while. But here are all the national funders that fund historical societies, published that they've funded historical societies in Minnesota. Okay. So we'll send you the link to that. It's just silly that we don't send you the link to all this stuff. But you can see that it's divided into different regions. Okay? Any questions about that part of it? Like I said, when we get back together again in an hour or so, we'll go more into this and more into the connecting with funders and stuff like that. All right. All right, so you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Board letters, how do we address board under giving and those, not capital campaigns, but special giving requests?
Mhm.
Board has not responded in an overwhelming manner, let's say.
Are you a board member or are you?
Director.
You're the director. You shouldn't have to ask your board for money. That should be the function of the board chair. And I don't know if that's not working or not for you, but definitely as an employee, you should not be asking for your salary.
Done in letter form, done in
Personal. Now, there should be one letter that goes out that says, from the board chair, that says, our expectation is that this will be one of the larger gifts that you give each year to charity. And that we expect 100% participation. And frankly, so do foundations. It is one of the ways that we tell whether or not an organization's board is a good operating board, is by whether or not you get a high percentage of. And in fact, what we go into great depth with organizations, especially organizations that are just trying to redo themselves, is that there should be a board giving plan every year. And the giving plan should include things, how much they're planning on giving. And I mean, let's face it, that's ain't gonna happen in a lot of organizations. But how much they're planning on giving, but also what they plan to do to help fundraise. So, and that doesn't necessarily have to be, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna ask 15 people. It may be that they have a house party. It may be that they write thank you notes. Thank you notes are a big thing. And a lot of organizations that I work with, at every board meeting, there are notes that have to be written, and the board members do that. And it means a lot more to donors if the board member does that. So there should be some plan that they do to help fundraise. Work on a committee, chair a committee, do something to help fundraise. So if you don't have that, I would recommend that you have a very decent, short policy that the board chair puts forth that just says, that it is the policy of this board to ask individual board members to make a contribution, to make a substantial contribution, and to commit themselves to 3 hours a month of fundraising, or 30 hours a month annually, or something like that. A simple thing, and at a board meeting where there's not a hell of a lot of other fraction going. It's just something simple, but you should have that, and then it should be a board person's job to go out and ask, if not the board chair. And sometimes, board chairs are just not the right people to work, and so there might be somebody else, like the treasurer or somebody like that, who can go out and do that. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Did you have another one?
I have another one, but I'll put it in the end of response, just suggestions for next.
Okay, all right, wonderful. Okay, and yeah, remind me to hand out those evaluations. Those are coming up, and they're in my bag someplace. Okay, so we were on institutional funders, and what did we do last year? And how much do we raise from institutions? How effective was our time? It really sounds like you guys have really, 4 out of 5, 8 out of 10 you really have been very effective in terms of your fundraising, which again is really good because you're not spending a lot of time. On the other hand, it says, could we be reaching out to more people? Could we be doing more letters of inquiry? Could we be asking more? And we'll talk about one of the groups that you may be missing. What could we have done better, and what feedback did we get from the institutions? I find that most funders are okay with saying, okay, we had this relationship. How do we do with it? Were we clear with you about what we did? Were there things that we could have presented better? What were the weak spots in our proposal? There's a good chance that you're going to get some bean counter in one of those relationships that's going to say, your budget didn't really add up to what your income statement was. You're going to get that kind of stuff, and that's good to know. It's also difficult to avoid, and if you try to be perfect in your finances, you're spending too much time on it. So you can get some good feedback. What do we need to raise this year? What do we need to do this year that's different than last year? How much of it is relatively secured? When we go through a budget with somebody, oops, too much. We say how much is secured and from where, the amount and source, relatively secured, and relatively, obviously that's a relative word, but we're talking about better than 50% chance, okay? Amount and source, iffy, we use different words, but iffy, which is anywhere from about 20 to 50%. And then we have long shots. And the long shots are like we were talking about before, these are the ones that we're going to take a little more of a risk. You're not going to expect a lot from this category, but this is the category where you will expect growth in the future. So if this is 2012, down here in 2014, you might be able to expect a little bit more of that. Okay, so this is your insurance money here, and you do try to get 80% out of this group. Relatively good. 50% is really good. Iffy, 20 to 50%. If you get 1 in 5, you're doing okay. And then the long shots, those are just developing relationships. Okay, so there's nothing magic about this. This is not stuff that you say, oh, how did he say this? What did he say? No, it's just what's comfortable for you. If you're comfortable in 3 levels, that's fine. All we're trying to say is that you should know that there's a few different ways of looking at the kind of money that you're going to be raising. Okay? And then the new funders, we talked about the why you forsaken us funders, the new types of funders, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Timelines. We really strongly recommend that you do some sort of a timeline. And there's something here at the end that will explain some of this. But you really should have some sort of a calendar for yourself of funders that you're going to be soliciting, So, McKnight, Schmidt, when are you going to do this, and who's responsible for it, and how much you're going to ask for. You really need to have this very clear, not only for yourself, because you need to have that kind of stuff, but also for the people that you are accountable to, so they can see just how much. So you say, okay, in the McKnight Foundation, the deadline is May 12th. We're going to be asking for somewhere in the area of 100K, and we're going to be asking for new museum cases, or for the World War II display, or something like that. Okay, so with each one, you want to have some sort of a category of how you're going to, what you're going to do over a 4-quarter period. And for me, I find it helpful that McKnight has something in the second quarter if I blow this, or if I realize I didn't do this right, they also have something in the fourth quarter. So when we write up a proposal, when we write a development plan for somebody, we'll say, we'll have this in black and white, and then we'll put this as gray. It's just because we're really sort of anal about that kind of stuff. So, but you have something that shows that what you're doing each year and when you're doing it and stuff like that. And you'll notice on our website that you can organize by either name or by date of deadline. So, and furthermore, Schmidt, they don't have deadlines, but you should put in a deadline for yourself anyway. Okay? Know that at the end of the year, they have more money to give away than they do at the beginning of the year. Know that in the summertime, most funders are not interested in having a very heavy calendar. So you try to do something in the first quarter or in the fourth quarter. Okay? But put them in. Put all of your different funders in, even if they don't have deadlines. Put them in there for yourself. You can always change it. If it doesn't work out that they worked out in February, then put them into March, into the second quarter. But put them into the calendar, okay? Because you won't do it otherwise. And hold those accountable to yourself. Make sure that you do the foundations without any deadlines, just the way you would do normal anything else. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. So, institutional funders' new mechanisms. We've talked about this a little bit, so we won't go into too much about this, but government. If you have not done an IMLS, is it worth doing, or do you think you have to be at least at a $1 million museum to do it, or?
There are so many others. IMLS over 50 might be.
Over 50?
Yeah.
Over 50?
But it's necessary. There's advancement through those stages. So.
Okay. All right. So there's different levels at which you might want to go after IMLS or something like that.
I would say too, though, different projects. We wrote one. It was only about $12,000, but it was for all new shelving. It was for a fireproof, waterproof photo cabinet. So it was for specific equipment. So it wasn't a long narrative to explain the program, and we got it. So I wouldn't just don't put on your list never the government ones. But I think the underlying question would be, for as difficult as those applications are you asking for something that you could easily make a case for? They're not the ones that spend hours coming up with a very elaborate narrative, project explanation.
Okay.
It's hard.
Okay.
If you're going for equipment, if you're going for a thing, I thought it was appropriate, it was easy to do.
Okay.
It was the right one to do.
Which grant was that?
We've done NEH for equipment, and we've done the library. We did the library one for a collections assessment, really specific. Programming is tough, because you're competing with huge organizations that are putting, such fancy programs together, your little program. But equipment, I've found those, we've done it 3 times now for very specific collections related. Like I say, shelving, a cabinet.
Okay.
And it's really important with IMLS and NEH to go through, like Bob said, they're kind of graduated. You want to start at the beginning. A lot of people jump to the big thing at the end, and they don't do the early stuff, the planning grant. Do the planning grant, those are a lot easier to get, and then you've got a good product that you can use as ammunition for any grant program. But it also helps going back to MLS to say, and you gave us the planning grant, here are the results, and now we need to implement that. And I know, just from local historical organizations that I work with across the state, a lot of them do go through that process of applying to IMLS in that way, and they almost always get the planning. But then where it falls apart is because it becomes more competitive the bigger the grant gets. And but that doesn't mean that just because you went through the planning and you didn't get the implementation, you still got a great planning document come to the legacy program, come to any of the other funders. You've got a great plan in place that other funders are gonna find attractive.
I think that MHS, the legacy, has really stressed, what I've learned from it, what I'm so appreciative of, is how you guys say, keep simple. Don't load the grant up with 15 parts of a mega project.
Right.
And that's helped me in all my grant writing is, you guys really stress being focused, break it down, come for this, come for this. And because I used to write these big grandiose, and that, so that's an outcome, maybe an unintended or you didn't realize, but it's made us more, it's made our other grant writing so much better.
That's called self-preservation, like that 481.
Yeah, but it's smart.
But it's also, you know, the legislature said use existing mechanisms. We've been doing grant programs since 1969, and one of our existing patterns of behavior, if you will, is that we want very focused, you know, simple projects. We don't want, you know, staff, sometimes when we get one that's complicated and a lot of moving parts, the way we talk about them usually inside is, this is a kitchen sink grant. In other words, it's everything except the kitchen sink. And there's so many moving parts that if one of them falls, then like a house of cards, everything else. And so that's why we want to have it nice and focused and specific, because we want to make sure that it's going to be successful. We don't want money endlessly tied up for no reason. There's not enough money to be tied up. There's a lot of demand out there. We had over $38 million in requests in the first biennium for $6.75 million. That speaks to the, you know, if you're sitting on, you know, $100,000 or something and nothing happens, there's a whole bunch of other grants out there that could have used that money. And it goes back to the state for no purpose. It doesn't accomplish. So that's why we look for these very narrow, very focused, very targeted sorts of projects.
Okay, all right. So under corporate, we've talked about this a little bit already as well, some grants, some sponsorships, volunteers, in-kind. Do people get in-kind contributions from corporations? What kind of in-kind stuff do you get from corporations?
One of the things is a design firm that's in town
Okay.
has actually taken us on, so they'll do a lot of their work in kind.
Oh, great. Okay, so it just isn't that you got some used desks and stuff like that. I mean, that is a possibility, and frankly, General Mills is great at that kind of stuff. If you're looking for used office equipment, they're just wonderful about it. Anybody else? Yes.
I've gotten usually most likely fundraising supplies, or we have one business that does all the locksmithing and door repairs for nothing.
Okay. How about, yes?
The in-kind services has been a way for some of our board members to meet their donation requirements. Legal services, one of our board members is a plumber, and so it's like.
And he's a lawyer, and he's a plumber.
No, that's two different board members.
Wearing some hats.
There's a lawyer joke in there somewhere.
Or a plumber joke, I'm not sure which one. Somebody. Okay, sorry.
Toilet.
I'm not sure.
No, there's two different, but
Okay.
it's just, yeah.
The volunteers, I don't know if you always have the opportunity, but we tell our clients that sometimes going for the volunteers first and then going for the money produces a lot more money. And it produces more money, one, because you have the volunteers who are giving, and you know that volunteers are 10 times more likely to give than a non-volunteer, but you also get the money from the corporation, dollars for doers, matching gifts, et cetera, et cetera. So there is that sort of stuff. Private foundations, faith-based charities, not so much the church themselves, but what we call the pew money. So there's more money in the pews. You go out and you speak at Assumption Lutheran, you will get more money likely from somebody in the pew. It's like the participatory events. You're looking for who in the pews is going to be able to give you money, who's going to be interested in participating with you. And then there's public charities. And it'd be interesting to find out how many people have gone to like the Elks, the Moose, the Kiwanis and stuff like that. Who has done that kind of fundraising? Okay, so a few people have done that kind of stuff. There is a system that people use that generally will raise between $15,000 and $20,000 a year, going after an extended number of these public charities, public benefit organizations, fraternities, whatever you want to call them. It's basically just getting two generally older guys, retired, who are willing to go and eat that chicken every Tuesday and Friday afternoon. And you give them some materials and you give them a pitch and you make sure that they follow up on that kind of stuff. And I can tell you that if they hit up 25, which is a couple a month, there's a good chance that you'll raise at least $7,500 from them. You don't get much from these guys, but they are interested in who you are, they're interested in what you can produce for them, and if you're willing to put their names, the American Legion, supported this exhibit or something like that, so much the better. Because their self-interest is preservation. They are looking for younger people to join them. And if you can reach out and say, this is a legitimate organization, this is a good organization, that helps them as well. And again, they're part of the history. I mean, they wouldn't be part of the Kiwanis if they weren't part of the history of the community. So use those guys, and like I said, 25 a year, and I can virtually, well, I can't guarantee anything, but I can tell you that I would be surprised if you didn't raise at least $7,500. And it's a low cost, low effort thing, especially if you get a couple volunteers to do that. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, individual donors, particularly around major donors. How are we doing with major donors? Who has a major donor campaign? Does anybody have a major donor campaign where you actually say, we want to raise money, bigger money?
We did with that parsonage project I was telling you.
Okay, so you have something going on. Anybody else?
Our capital campaign.
Your capital campaign was a major donor campaign?
Right.
Yeah, most capital campaigns have a huge major donor. Do you have an annual major donor thing going at all? Okay. What would you consider a major donor gift? What would you consider a gift? A major donor gift? 5,000. I started a little lower. I started at 1,000. $5,000 to start with. A $5,000 gift is very generous. It's really a commitment, and it might be over a 3-year period. But if you're trying to start a major donor campaign, I would start with $1,000. And here's what I would do. I would say to my board members, if we can identify 10 people who in the next year could give us $1,000, that we have a major donor campaign in our hands. We can do that. And I'm not talking about somebody saying, well, Oprah Winfrey's very wealthy, she can give us $1,000. No, it's got to be somebody you know. And we can talk about the storyteller and the ask. Okay? We can talk about how we're going to do this. But let's come up with the names of 10 people who can give us $1,000 or more. Okay? And we go into those folks, we create our pitch, we create our talk, we make sure that our storyteller is a good storyteller, our asker is a good asker. We go in and we make those calls and we say, we want you to be part of the original, club, history club, donors or something like that. And we talk to them about what that could be. And furthermore, if they can't give you $1,000, if they can't give you $1,000 in 1 year, make it a 2-year pledge. Okay? So that you're really only asking them for 2 $500 gifts. Yes?
Okay, my former boss started this as the lifetime donor level.
Uh-huh.
And so we have 32 of those.
Wonderful.
Well, over, 15 or 20 years.
Uh-huh.
But it's a single one. If you give $1,000 and you choose to, you can be a lifetime donor. Most of them take it literally and don't give
any more than that.
I would say about maybe, I don't know, maybe
continue to do their annual $25 membership. And we have a $100 level now, we call it the sustainer. You know, and they'll give it to a special project or campaign.
And I don't think that that's all that bad, but if 25% out of 32, that means about 8 people are giving that. That's not bad, but it was a mistake. I mean, in retrospect, and you know, hindsight 2020. But I would suggest that that you let 3/4 of the people off the hook.
We would like to kind of like fade that like membership attachment to it, so
Yeah.
it's just a giving level.
Yes, I would seriously think about that. And maybe what you can do is you can turn them into like the founders group or something like that, and you give them a brick. You know, I got to tell you, bricks are so good. I have found that bricks, or even a chunk of a frame around somebody's name. You know, there's one organization, we have a mental health organization, where you go in and you sign your name on the wall, and they put a clear glass frame over it. So you don't even have to buy the damn brick. All you're doing is buying the frame for it, you know. And it's their wall of fame. And they're getting $1,000 for those frames, you know. Now they're nice frames, but, you know, nevertheless, you know. So I would think about that, but I would, getting off the subject again, I would think about turning that into the founders group or something like that, or just some Paul Bunyan group, or, you know, some whoever is. And then working to develop a new major donor campaign. Frankly, I think the sustainers thing is probably even more important. If you can develop a sustainers piece where people are taking $10 a month out of their checkbook, you know, you will get a heck of a lot more money than if you get the $1,000 once you, frankly, even in the long run.
Steve, again, I just have to tell Minnesota Historical Society, I've gotten so much gold out of today. It was well worth the ride down. We have the same thing. We gave life memberships away. We found $1,000, and they never sent any more. And then we just had our charities review, and they said, you can't have life members. We've kept the money, and we've kept it like an endowment, only spent the interest. They told me, you actually have to have an actuarial chart. You have to pull out so much a year and put it in your membership. So we were like, what are we going to do with these people who think they've given once and did a great thing? So I'm gonna go buy a frame of Michael's on the way home. But so we need to convert them to this idea of founders, and then we're going to hit them again.
You know, God bless the Charity Review Council. I was on their board for 3 years, and it's like having the dean of discipline at a junior high school. You know, it is not necessarily all that important. You know, I mean, it's good to have them there, and they protect a lot of us from, you know, going the wrong way, and it's really nice to have their little seal of approval and stuff like that. But on something like this, you know, one of our organizations got kicked out because they had a board member who was on the board for more than 10 years. You know, and they didn't want to kick the guy off because he was a nice guy and he was very helpful and stuff like that. So they took away their seal of approval for something silly like that. So be careful with how much you need to, you know, and you can negotiate with them. You can say, okay, we'll do this, but we're not going to go all the way.
But I like this idea of switching them, because we never get more from them.
Have you ever solicited them for, because before I came, there was probably about 40 people on lifetime memberships, and we haven't offered that for over 10 years. But we have solicited them, you know, at different points and said, would you consider another gift? And then the other thing is that they're dying, so they're going away.
Yeah.
You know, we're not getting any more, which is, I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but.
We just send out renewal slips, and most of our lifetime people pay their yearly membership.
Yeah.
They do anyway.
Yeah, we started
All right.
doing that too.
Whether it's they're not, you know, they're on our membership list,
Yeah.
and they're how many get their renewal thing, everybody gets it, and I'd say a majority of ours send it. Yeah, they're individual or their household, or sometimes Century, or whatever.
Oh, okay, so nice little clubs that they can be part of, yeah.
What I actually started doing just last year is I have a letter that I have 2 life members sign and goes out to all of them. And that is
That's a
actually
good
created
idea.
it to where, because they know those names, where I raised $1,000 out of 50 people last year.
Wow, well, there you go.
So,
This is
There you go.
great.
that hadn't been given in 5 to 10 years.
So the founder sent, or life members
Yeah.
sent to other life members.
There you go,
They're getting
that's
that
good.
peer pressure.
We did
Yeah.
that for fundraising too, but in our campaign,
Mhm.
is we had one of our lifetime members sign the giving thing, the letter.
The letter?
He went on all the letters,
Mhm.
saying, as a member, you've enjoyed the museum, and
Mhm.
now it's time to give back.
Yeah, and how does that language work for you?
But it's better than like my
Oh, I
name
know,
or
I know.
somebody.
But no, you're absolutely right, yeah, yeah. And I think it's better than having the principal, I mean, we have some, organizations who say, well, the principal and the pastor of the largest church.
Yeah, it's better than Bob signing.
So they're sending to their friends, they're making.
No, to our membership.
To the whole membership.
Yep, so a life member signs the fundraising letter, and it goes to all the membership.
So it's coming from a member.
It's coming from a member to a member.
So it's peer pressure instead of.
Yeah, staff people should not have to sign those kind of letters. I mean, I just don't think, I think people probably respect the staff people, but it really should be coming, because it's too closely
They just
connected
think I'm
people's
trying
heads.
to raise my.
Yes, that's right, yeah. You can have the raise if you can raise it, it's that sort of idea.
That's because
you know.
you attached your vacation pictures, so you should.
I don't get vacation.
I always tell them it's for my jewelry collection. That's what's getting me.
So the next piece is the individual donors in mass appeal. So this is online, this is a direct mail solicitation, these are tin cans, and I gotta tell you, the tin cans are coming back. Thanks to McDonald's. Tin cans are coming back. McDonald's now, when you go through their drive-through,
Oh, yeah.
you're probably healthier people than I am. But when I go through the McDonald's and drive-through, it always says, put your change in here and stuff like that, and they raise literally millions of dollars a year in those little boxes. And people are getting sort of comfortable with those little boxes. And so we have been going back and like in the Frogtown Rondo neighborhood, which is the sort of black and Hispanic and Asian neighborhood near downtown St. Paul. We've been putting cans for the Little Development Corporation, and we raised $15,000 in just the last 3 months.
Oh my God.
People really, they're really hard pressed because of the motorway, what do they call it, light rail. But people understand that this is something that's important. And so I would encourage you to think about that and at least use it in some places where you think that your constituency might go more often. Antique shops, perhaps. Drugstores, perhaps. I'm not sure, but you might try having something. And what Fran figured out was that it was the size, the shape of the box. That just putting a can there, a juice can, didn't work. But having, a kid design a box or something like that, and just putting a slit in it, that was much more, it stood out much more. So, and they did get Super America to put some boxes up. So, how much did we raise from mass appeals? How effective was our time? Did we do direct mail solicitation? Who does direct mail solicitation? You do? And how many times a year do you do it?
Oh, well, a lot of it was in regards to the early
The
work campaign for the
Okay.
History Center, but otherwise we don't do a lot of them.
Are you going to do it? Can you continue it now?
Oh, yeah, we typically will draw out something once or twice a year.
Okay, once or twice a year, so you're not sure whether or not you want to do it?
Because everything has been so focused on
The
this
cap.
History Center and the capital campaign, and getting the money for that everything else is kind of sitting over here.
Okay.
And we need to go back and now reevaluate how we're going to do things.
I'm going to tell you, the first thing, when I joined the Catholic seminary, the first thing my pastor told me was, never burn the mortgage.
So just keep it burning forever and
Yeah, well, always.
It's always on fire?
Always
Yeah, it never
on
goes
fire.
out?
That's right, the eternal flame, you know, I mean, that's our version of the, but the idea was that if you have a fundraising mechanism that continues to work, you don't necessarily have to stop it just because the capital campaign is reached, you know. Now you have responsibilities for the building,
Right.
you know. I mean, the building itself is as expensive. St. Thomas says that 15 cents out of every dollar that they get in the capital campaign goes to maintenance. You know, so.
That goes to the fact that as nonprofits, we all want to, we all dream about someday being self-sustained,
Yeah.
always having enough money for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact is, as nonprofits, we all have to be, we have to remain needy to keep the involvement of our community.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be just needy enough.
Just needy
Yeah.
enough.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Because I still think that the element of marvelous has to be there, and increasingly so. But I do think that there's just that level of appropriate neediness.
Yes.
You know,
Yes, that's
no
right.
white Cadillac Escalades. You know. So, yes.
Oh, when you said don't burn the mortgage, because I used to work for a church and our pastor said you always have to have a mortgage.
Yeah.
Always. Whether you can pay it off 10 times,
Yeah.
you always have to refinance and have a mortgage or people will stop you.
Exactly. And that was my experience in seminary, was that people kept their mortgage going, or their capital campaigns going, just because, I mean, St. Thomas no longer has a single capital campaign, you know. I mean, they're about to finish a $500 million capital campaign. They're already rolling out the materials for the next capital campaign because they know that people will give to them on an ongoing basis. Now, that's St. Thomas, and it's, you know, obviously a little bit different than Steele County Historical Society, but nevertheless, there is something that says, just keep going with something that's working for you. You know, you can always reframe what it is that you how you talk about
Well,
it.
and our big thing is, you know, having people understand that if we can get that debt out of the way, then that money can go to
Mhm.
programming and education and things that are really gonna be of value.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, we had one client, a youth organization, that wanted to pay off its mortgage, and their argument was that if they could pay off this $475,000, they could serve 13 more kids a year or something like that, you know. So there is that sort of sense of, you know, ongoing need, you know. So at any rate, and that works particularly well with mass appeals. Not as much with major donors, but with mass appeals it really works. Okay? Special events, sometimes we call them participatory events. They're dinners, they're walkathons, whatever it is. Again, what's the idea behind participatory events? Identifying who can make the larger gift. You know, I mean, to some extent, you do the walkathon, you do the dinner, it's saying thank you to people and stuff like that, and you want that kind of participation. But as a fundraiser, what you're looking at is the next step, is identifying, is going back to those people and saying, who of these people can we identify that can give us $10,000 or $20,000 or you know, are good for a donor gift, eventually, a planned giving gift. So how much we raised from special events, how effective was our time? This is a hard one to judge with special events because it is so much has to do with volunteer stuff. You know, what could we have done better? I always recommend that people look at add-ons. What can we do to add on to the event? Is that add a wine auction, a lottery, with kids organizations, you often get, you know, people will, they'll say, well, I'll mow your lawn for you. You know, you'll get some kid to go out and mow your lawn. We had one senior organization where they got Excel to agree that they would change the light bulbs, going twice a year and change the light bulbs and stuff like that. So different kinds of auctions and stuff like that. Look for those sort of add-on events that can make a difference of $5,000 to $10,000. So what do we need to raise this year? Is this a year that we change something dramatically? Do we increase the price of it? I can tell you that there is one really golden thing about whether or not a dinner should be continued, and that's if you're thinking about lowering the price, that's it. You've had it. That event should no longer be around. You might want to convert it to something else, but if you've been going at $75 a person and you're thinking about, well, maybe more people will come if it's $50, don't do it. Just don't do it. It just ain't gonna help you much. It's gonna continue to feel bad. You're just not gonna do that thing. Do something different. Okay? So, online fundraising. 1 in 10 of us gave online fundraising last year. Is there anybody who doesn't have a website? No? Everybody has a website? Wonderful. As a donor and as a consultant, it's the first place I go, is to the website. While people are talking to me on the phone, I'm going to the website to see what's there. If I'm a funder and I don't see a Donate Now button on there, something worries me. You can get a Donate Now button basically for about $200, and the maintenance, the monthly upkeep fee is generally somewhere in the area of $12 to $15. It's worth it just so that you can show people that you have the capability of doing online fundraising. It is a credibility thing, if nothing else. Don't go in for those $40,000 things, but make sure that you have an online button. Katya Anderson's group, Donation for the Good.
Give me.
Well, GiveMin, yes. Does people use GiveMin?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, you gotta use it. But there's also the Donations for the Good, or Donations for Good. Network for Good. Okay, do you use that at all for?
I recognize it, but we don't necessarily use it, but I feel like it's tied in with GiveMin.
It is.
Well, it's kind of the same, yeah.
We've completely switched to GiveMin. The money comes from Razoo.
Razoo.
It used to come from Network for Good.
Mm.
So like on our page, the Donate Now button pulls you over to then Give.
Okay.
Where you can create pages for specific things. It's unbelievable.
Okay. Again, this is someplace where you go to the high school, you look for the biggest geek, and you make sure that they help you with this. You know, and frankly, it's good because they're doing something for the community that they didn't think that they would have. You know, I mean, it's like the audio-visual or the chess club when we were younger. You know, I mean, this is something where people can actually do some good, and it doesn't take much for them to understand how to do it. You know, but get some sort of donate online button. It's really critically important. We talked about the, yes?
I was just going to comment, we use PayPal, and we don't have to pay anything for the button, we just pay a small fee per transaction. So we didn't even have to do anything up front.
Okay.
PayPal.
PayPal?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot more people have PayPal now because of, there are, go ahead.
Do people know about Square as a way
No.
to accept charge cards? So I was mentioning at the break that we were looking for every $50 we could find in 09, 10, 11 to cut costs. So even my credit card processing, my credit card stuff comes with membership. So I have the heaviest use September to January. After that, I can't even remember how to process a credit card that comes so infrequent. But I had to pay my credit card provider a monthly fee. So Square, I've got it on my iPad. For nonprofits, you get the little card reader, it's a little white square plastic, and you can run the card through your smartphone or iPad. They charge a percent of each card. So when we're having an event and we're out and around, I can take their card.
Wow.
But in the office, that's how I process all the credit cards now.
No.
So I've dropped my yearly credit card fee and just use that. And it emails the receipt directly to the person. It links right into your QuickBooks. It's kind of miraculous.
Where is that? Is that its own company,
So
Square?
if you go online, you go to Square,
Okay.
and then you go in as a nonprofit. They make everything available to you for free.
Okay. It's an app, so you get it, it's on, you can put it on your phone. It has a little piece of equipment, I believe it plugs in the bottom here. And basically all it is a credit card swipe. So you get your credit card, and then you basically and retailers use it, you can use it for collecting donations, It's fantastic, actually.
It's actually squareup.com.
Square Up?
Square Up?
That might be a different one. So let me-
Yeah, double check, because there are a lot of places, unfortunately, there are a lot of apps that try to play on its popularity.
That's it?
Is it called Square Up?
I didn't know that.
Because they got Square on here, and I never.
Well, I mean, the website is
Oh, Square Up. Okay, the app is
Yeah, that's
Square.
The product is called Square, but the website is.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
really cool, and this, now we're really going off, but they developed for-profit, it's called Square Wallet. And so if you're a coffee shop that's set up as Square, when I walk in with my phone, that I'm the Square customer, and I just say, okay, I'll have a latte. I don't take my phone out, I don't take my wallet out, it just charges.
Are you kidding?
Wow.
Just wait,
Yeah.
it's only a couple years until they embed the gift in your wrist.
They're gonna just put it on your eyes, young eyes.
Yeah, but that's cool, but then, is there, like, I would be worried about piracy. I always think, I'm always negative about technology till it's like been out there.
I haven't heard problems with, but anyway, for,
Somebody's
not
got
the,
5 million lattes on your.
yeah. Not the Square Wallet, but the Square just for yourselves is another way, but we, anyway, PayPal and GiveMin and Square
Okay.
have been big cost savers for me.
How about Facebook? People using Facebook for that? And does that work?
Oh, yeah.
Does it really?
Oh,
See,
yeah.
I know, like, for younger people, that's, I mean, you know, the kids that I know that I work with, they don't even have emails anymore. It's all about Facebook, you know?
Well, key to know is to understand the generational difference in use of social media. Younger people are probably going to be more attracted to sites like Facebook, things like that. But typically, for older people, 65 and above, or even 55 and above, email is the big tool.
That's still the tool.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All
For
right.
young people, forget it. They have no interest in the email. But for older people, email is a big tool for both like marketing, campaigning, that type of thing.
Okay, but what about what you said this morning where there's more people over 65 on Facebook than?
There are now, but I think they're looking for their grandchildren's pictures.
Well,
like
that's
that,
just it. I know my mother uses it to spy on the grandkids because they don't call her, so.
You don't call, so I
Yeah, she doesn't, don't call, so I'm gonna find it on Facebook.
I found actually exactly that the use of Facebook, younger people have fled from Facebook because it's our generation that have designated it.
Uh-huh.
So,
That's doing the deviant art.
yeah, so we find that actually Facebook, and again, just like you said, I got a young person to set it all up for us, and it's tied to everything we send out. Everything is, share on Facebook. And when you're managing your own page, you can jump in and see your impressions. It's unbelievable how many people pop on a historic photo. We'll just put up a historic, like Passover, we put up a funny photo, and then we just make funny things underneath. Did you make the soup? It said like, did you make the soup? I didn't make the soup. Hey, we got problems, there's no soup. So, and that's all we do. And it gets hundreds of impressions. So that means somebody's looked, they've opened it, they've told someone else to look. So we see it, we put our programming up there, we're not sure we have driven people to programming, but we feel we put our name in front of all kinds of people, and then you can see who likes you. We're getting likes from all around the world. So again, is it gonna bring us hundreds of thousands of dollars? We think it drives them to our research page, we just think it raises awareness, and then we're looking to get retweeted. So, it's whatever that means. But, so Facebook has turned out to be a great place for us, again, in this tough economic time, we're looking for how can we increase contact without costing money.
Yeah, and I do think that Facebook is a good way of doing it. And I do think that email is still for the monthly newsletter or something like that. And frankly, I think email is also a good thing if you're looking at institutional donors. We recommend that we send out, that each of our clients sends out at least once a month an email that is more directed at the kind of research that you're doing, the kind of stuff that you're finding out, the sort of impactful stuff that you're doing, and send that out to prospective donors. We can get you the list, the ACH list that we have online. We can give you the email address, the email addresses of the people that we know, and you can use that as a way of accessing donors. And just send them a list. If they want to, this is protocol. If they want to kick you off, they can do that. That's the law. But a lot of times people say, I want to know what's going on. I'm interested in it. And frankly, if you're a funder, you are a good funder because you know what's going on in the community. You know what's going on in New Ulm. You know what's going on in Austin. You know what's going on. And that's an important piece, and you can contribute to that. You know, so don't feel afraid to email people. And all it has to do is, I mean, you want to, again, keep it simple, keep a lot of white space. A letter from somebody from World War II, a recent note from a classroom full of kids about what they learned, a photo of a new piece that you've acquired, something that is just sort of out there and that's visual and that says, we are a living organization. That's what you want. And funders, frankly, they make their goods off of having lots of information that they can use and they can sort of integrate into different things. The information that you can give them just helps that job so much more. So you want to become sort of the expert in your field, which is the history of Fairmont or the sort of the community of what it looked like back in the 50s or something like that. So online fundraising, increasingly important. And we talked before about YouTube. Really, think about YouTube as a mechanism. I have to say that I am not a big fan for Access Philanthropy, so I can understand why you would think that that's a thing. But I would recommend that you think about doing something with YouTube.
I was like, you mentioned a couple of other possibilities
Sure.
too. One of the things with Facebook, there's being on Facebook and making campaign pleas there. But the other thing too is that if you notice little ads on the side, important to investigate that, and it's pretty obtainable because you pay per click or you pay per 1,000 impressions. But you can, but you can specifically target. So if you want to target people within like cities in your area of a certain age group, male or female, or people who are, who have certain interests, you can target that, and depending on how well you're targeting, you can have a very successful campaign. I've done that in several things for MHS, and sometimes it's been a complete miss, sometimes it's just dead on. But I think the better we can fit the demographic, the better success we have. Google AdWords also is another thing to check on. That's again, when you do Google search, you see little ads on there. If you're a nonprofit, and I would investigate, they have a program for nonprofits. You can't directly sell things. I'm not sure about fundraising, but I know you can't sell things. But I know a lot of organizations like the Red Cross and things like that are on there. And again, a lot of it's helping, please, things like that. But it might be, but you can sign up as a nonprofit and you can get free space on there. They also give you time to time, like these little $100 gift cards, so you can buy $100 worth of. And again, that's pay per click or pay per, and it's a bidding type of thing. But you can also, sometimes they give you like $100 coupons, so you can do $100 worth just to get your feet wet type of thing. And it's a really good, and to be honest, I think it's one of those things that isn't looked at by a lot of organizations, and I think it certainly is one, particularly if you can target the right groups of people and things. So
there's another reason to do it. I was just realizing, if you're on Facebook, we're on Facebook, and then we're on Minnesota Reflections, part of Minnesota Digital Libraries, and we're also part of Flickr Commons. All those impressions, like if you jump on Flickr Commons right now, you can see one of our photos, thousands of views. So I get to report that as a measurable outcome of our work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason just to get something up there, because it really makes your numbers look great beyond people having to physically come to you. And there's another thing we haven't tried yet, but I keep looking at it. People have heard of Kickstarter. And I'm trying to think of a project to put up on that. That's this cool site where you ask people to give $1, $5, whatever they want to give, to a particular project. And it's that notion of micro-philanthropy. You don't have to be the Hormels of the world to give a chunk of money. Give $5 to get. I'm trying to think about doing it about an exhibit. Say $1,000 and we can create 5 banners of this.
Or a kid's project, a history project. or
Yeah,
something.
something, but I love that democracy idea.
You have to set a goal that you want to raise, and you have to meet it.
You don't get the money otherwise?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I'm just thinking
Make
to
it reasonable.
try these viral things to see if we can catch fire with different demographics. That would, to my mind, I'm thinking Kickstarter is a much younger audience than I've ever been in front of.
Mhm.
It would just be fun to introduce history and
Mhm.
these kind of projects to, under 40s.
Yeah.
My people are 90.
If any of you have followed the Uncatalogued Museum, we sometimes send out blog notes from that. It's run by a woman in New York named Linda Norris, and Linda has successfully used Kickstarter in her museum work, so you can, I'm sure, just send Linda a quick note. She knows me, so we present at conferences together sometimes, so feel free to drop my name if you want, and just say, I told you this to contact her, so but I'm sure she'd be happy to fill you in on exactly how she went about.
And it's called Uncatalogued?
Yeah, the Uncatalogued Museum, that's a blog.
I'm going to make one more statement, though, if you don't mind. It's none of these work if people don't know about them, and I can't emphasize enough the need to cross work your campaigns so that as much as it's great online, have printed flyers, have these links on your printed flyers so that people know your Facebook page, that you have one. If you have a YouTube page, they got to know it. You got to put it on your website that there's something there. Because I find a lot of times when I'm looking at organizations, I'm looking at a lot of historical societies, I don't see that. I see they have a Facebook page that's not linked to their website and vice versa. And they might not even be putting this on printed materials when I look at newsletters. So it's critical. If you want these things to succeed, you've got to start cross-linking and putting them on printed pieces.
And you have to reach out. I mean, you have to go down one of those friends lists and maybe click all of them so that their stuff starts showing up. You're seeing what they're doing, but you're also showing up on theirs. Is that right, Jim?
Well, in friends, well, it depends. I mean, if you're talking about Facebook, they have to basically just like you. It's not you and a personal connection. It's they like your organization.
But if I'm writing about what's happening at my museum to my friends,
Right.
and I'm trying to drive them to my museum site.
To your friends, right? If they're interested, definitely.
Because I just recently did start to, I went to that tech conference up at the Hyatt, and they were saying that you need to be more personal. Don't talk from your institution, from your museum, as if you're the museum. I have to talk as if I'm Sheila Morris. And this is my passion, and this is what's going on here.
Yeah.
And they want to, they want that relationship, and it's personal. It's personal to me. I want it to be personal to everybody who knows about us.
And that actually, I think it's successful. I've seen that done with MHS. Some of the people there, like events that they have, Alita, I think it was. She has all of her personal friends who like going out to events, and when she puts these events on, she sends it out to all of her friend list, and then their friends then send out to her list. So she can do that. She's got that network. I mean, if I did it, I mean, a lot of my friends are out of state, and they would be going like, "What are you doing? What are you sending this to us?" But so something like that. The other thing I want to bring up though is just on a side note on that, but is back to email. Again, very successful tool, but also be very careful because of the Can Spam Act. You have to be very careful about how you send emails, and never, I'll say this again, never buy an email list. Don't ever buy it. You may have people offer it to you. First of all, it's most likely illegal because the people have to sign up. All right, you can't just even if someone wants to give you a list, you can't do that because they have got to opt in. So what you could do, if you have an organization, like I was on the board of the Ridgefield Historical Society, and there's Wood Lake Nature Center, all right? We're right next to one another. We could, if Wood Lake Nature Center, if we're having an event, we could tell them, here is our event, please put it in your newsletter. And they could do that, and vice versa. We could have that type of agreement. But we cannot say, Woodlake, can you give us your email list, and we'll give you yours. That's illegal. So be very careful about that.
Okay. But you can, once you have sent up something, you can say, forward this to a friend.
You have a forward, yeah. If I get an email, I can as a person forward it to somebody individually. I can forward to a friend. That's yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me say one more thing about the website, and that is the website. If the structure is old, that's fine. We understand that. If the content is old, that's not so fine. So if you have a calendar that still has 2009 dates on it, not so fine. You know, the pictures are old. If something about the design says, you know, this was made in 2005, that's understandable. Content updates have to be there, okay? As somebody who constantly goes through this stuff and sees it through the eyes of funders, you really do need to update the content. Even if it means taking down something that you know, and re-putting it up there in a new date or something like that, okay? One of our clients circulates his blogs every year. You know, he has about 10, 12 blogs out of a weekly blog, and that he'll put up every year. And I think that's okay, but if you're talking about your website, I think you need to make sure that you're pretty clean about that. Okay. Individual donors, new mechanisms. Do we want to do different special events, like an auction, a new gala, perhaps at a different site? Do we want to do some sort of online fundraising? What can we do that's online fundraising? Are there things that we can do with major donor campaigns? The one place that I would really think about with this is house parties. House parties are just, as a board member for Fairmont, you say, I will invite 10 friends, or I will invite 8 friends. No guarantee that they're going to give. You tell them, we're going to talk to you about the Historical Society, and we're going to ask you for your support, but there's no commitments there. House parties are a really good way to start identifying new major donors, okay? And it's low cost, low thrust, in that it doesn't make the person who's doing the invited feel like they're wrenching the last dime out of their friend. It's just a story that you're telling, and then somebody does the ask. Somebody gets up there, and the ask doesn't have to be you. The ask doesn't have to be somebody. It can be somebody who. I like to use people who are not necessarily associated with the organization to say, you know, this really is a good investment in our community, because then it makes you look like a third party, and you kind of like those third party endorsements, you know. Or, you know, in the case of foundations, perhaps a funder or a foundation person might be willing to do something like that. We kind of like those kind of things. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at somebody's house. It can be at Perkins at 8 o'clock in the morning. It can be at the new tea house or the new coffee shop. It can be even in a park plaza of some sort. Perhaps at the museum itself, although I sort of think people are more comfortable with not being at the museum. Different mass appeals, workplace fundraising. You have a United Way campaign, and they use workplace fundraising. There are some programs that you could probably hook into. The education program for kids, a summer camp for kids. Those are things that you could hook into in terms of United Way and become part of that campaign. If you have a number of federal employees, you can become part of what's it called? The Combined Federal Campaign, which is just a workplace fundraising campaign for United Way and thousands of other employees, thousands of other charities that you can do that. I really hate saying this, but telemarketing is a very effective way of fundraising for arts and humanities organizations. It is not so much for human service organizations anymore, even for education organizations, although colleges have not found that out yet. But for arts and cultural organizations, it's still a very strong piece of the fundraising picture. Now, don't do that on your own unless you're just going to be, you have a list of, 200 people that you want to call on, you want to have board members or volunteers call, you give them a script one night, you give them a script, you give them a little training, you give them a little food, and when somebody makes a pledge, you sort of cheer them on and stuff like that. It's a relatively simple thing. But if you want to do it professionally, there are professional firms that do this kind of telemarketing, and they do it very effectively. Unfortunately for those of us whose dinners they interrupt, nevertheless, they still do it very, very, very effectively. So you might want to think about that.
Does that return, is it the same in smaller communities as in bigger communities? Because
In
I know
telemarketing?
when someone calls my house and says, I'm calling from the senior center in Austin, I know if they are or not. If you have a heavy southern accent, you're not calling from the senior center in Austin. And so I'm just curious if, when you're in a smaller community, if it's a negative correlation.
I think there's the question, the question is more about, do they recognize your voice, and do they recognize, whether or not you're a prisoner or not, because about a third of all of the telemarketing solicitors are prisoners. Yeah, Stillwater has a huge telemarketing center. Stillwater Prison is a huge telemarketing center. So there's a good chance, at least 1 in 3, that you've got a prisoner. So I think that's fair enough. It's a fair enough question. If you don't have your own volunteers doing it and you're in a smaller community, it's probably not a good idea to do that. Then you're only talking about, let's get the 200 telephone numbers that we can use. And telemarketing, cold calling is difficult. So it really has to be somebody whose name or telephone number came up at some point. And, at a fair, you were taking down names and telephone numbers or something like that. Okay? Donor communications. We've talked a lot about this, so I don't want to get into too much about this, but what did we do last year? What did we do online? What did we do direct mail, media? What do we do in terms of our branding, our corporate look, our ancillaries? One of the things that you can do, I want to say relatively cheaply, I don't know what other people would is to change your logo, is to upgrade your logo. Even if you think it looks relatively nice, upgrading your logo makes you pop more. And I think you just did it, right?
We just did, in fact.
I don't want you to have to.
It's on the grant cards.
Okay.
But that's where you're saying put the clock face.
Yeah, it started out, but the clock's really insignificant now compared to the first ones that we did on the
At any rate,
David.
the idea of upgrading your logo, it can be relatively cheap. Most designers for this kind of stuff are $25, $45 an hour.
That's a little for
Okay. Okay. And I just think it works very well in terms of saying to the community that you're getting more and more professional all the time and stuff like that. I'm, like I say, I'm something of a skeptic about it, but I do know that when we changed our logo, that we did get a lot of compliments, a lot of things from people saying, boy, that's really cool, And when we started adding our thing that says know who, know how, people remember that. The know who, know how, which I think is a little flaky, but nevertheless, I think it works for people.
Yeah, can I make one? As a former graphic designer that's worked in ad agencies doing logos, is be careful you get what you pay for. If you decide to hire the board member's daughter or son that's in high school to do your logo, you're going to get that. What you want to get is you want to get something that's not only going to give you a logo, but also guidelines on how that logo should be used. Yeah. And that's very important. And it is good to seek out maybe a firm or something, that has experience in it and has done work that you like. And maybe talk with other organizations.
I'm a graphic designer too, Joe.
Yeah.
Don't have logo contests.
Don't have logo.
Oh, don't have a logo contest. Got it. Oh, those are awful.
I'm also a graphic designer. The other thing is, it shouldn't be.
Is this what happens to
I'm
sorry.
I think the main test is, if you could swap out with another county and no one would know that you swapped with another county's historical society logo, then that's not a good enough logo. It needs to be specific to you and what.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I thought you came up with a great fundraising thing.
Just swap logos?
Yeah, okay. All right. So what was effective about our communications last year? Really, this is, I mean, there is a piece on the website, on the Moodle thing, that says a communications audit. And it basically goes through a lot of different questions about, you know, what your look is like, what your, how you talk about yourself, you know, what your press relationships are like, et cetera, et cetera. I would recommend that you at least sort of visit through that and see if there are questions that you would have. Okay? Infrastructure. Again, I think this is probably the thing that is holding most of us back more often than not, is the infrastructure. What resources do we have? And I'm not talking about resources occasionally. I'm talking about ongoing resources that we have to support fundraising. This is one of the more difficult things for a board, and especially for a manager to deal with, is how much time do I have to put into fundraising? How much time do I have to put into fundraising every month? That's a very difficult question for people to ask. You know, how much of the staff time? We have this great organization. It's clearly could be a national organization. The executive director is really dynamic, but she only wants to make one call a month for fundraising. And I say, Barbara, you make 10 calls a month, I can guarantee you $10,000. And she says, no, I just don't have time for it, you know. And I think she'd be good at it. I think she knows that she would be good at it, but she doesn't see the priority of it. You really have to decide together what the priority is, you know. And I can tell you there was just a study done that showed that even adding 1/4 time support staff increases the effectiveness of a fundraising by 1/3. So you're hiring somebody for 5 hours, 10 hours a week, you know, at $7, $10, $15 an hour, and you're increasing your fundraising dramatically. You know, so in fact, I think the article was, you know, need to increase your fundraising, hire a secretary. You know, something, you know, that financial support. What's your budget? Can you tell me what your budget is for fundraising? Do you have a budget for fundraising? Sheila? No? How about you guys?
Just $1,200.
$1,200. All right.
I know, because I spent it already.
How, you know, I mean, and that's understandable when you're really, you know, you have a budget of less than $50,000. But once you've got a budget of more than $50,000, you really need to start thinking about what is the budget for this. Not just for our staff person, but also for, you know, doing direct mail solicitations, doing that kind of stuff, because you don't want to keep strangling yourself. And that's the deal, is that you keep strangling yourself. You say, well, we're not doing so well this year, so we will only send out 5,000 pieces, or we'll only send out 200 pieces, rather than the 10,000 pieces that we did last year. You have to have a budget for fundraising. And if you need help with that, of course we would be glad to help you with that, and trying to figure out what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it, and then how much you want to cost on it. IT or technical support. The common wisdom now is that 1 in 4 names of donors is lost due to misspellings, due to data entry mistakes, due to all kinds of stupid mistakes. If you want to help yourself and you have a long list of donors, get somebody who is willing to do that kind of data entry for you. Okay? I know that sounds like a really menial task, but it's something that if you know somebody is really good data entry, can do that kind of stuff, get somebody to do that. And get them to commit themselves to 2 hours, 3 hours a week, or 5 hours, 10 hours a month. Do that. I think that will seriously help yourself. And this is especially true if you have not updated your data information for a long time. Yes?
I've got a case in point on that one. Before I started my organization, we had a $5,000 a year donor. They misspelled their name. It took us 4 years to get her back. $5,000 a year.
Wow. Yeah, see, that kind of stuff is so stupid, you know? And if, you know, sometimes people will sign something, but you can't really tell what they're signing, like their checks or something like that, and it's so easy to mistake Stephanie for Stephen, you know? Or, you know, Olson with an E versus Olson with an O. And I don't know if anybody's named Olson here, but people who are named Olson with an E are very sensitive about that, Olson with an E, you know? So you have to get that right. And there are people who can look that up for you, or people who can call for you, who have sort of a generic secretary kind of a sound to them, so you don't have to say, I don't remember you, even though you gave me $5,000. Somebody can say, we're just checking our records, want to make sure that we have the right address and telephone number and blah, 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 blah. You know, that's critically important, you know. So get somebody to do that technical or IT support. Unless you're over $1 million, I would say that the IT support that you need for keeping donor records, you can do it on Excel. You know, there are cheap or free programs that you can use. Don't, unless you're over $1 million, don't do that. Don't go out and buy somebody's package. Volunteers and board. This is the most difficult thing. And again, this is one of those things where oftentimes it's the outsider who has to come in and say, look folks, you know, this board needs to be cleaned up, you know. Look folks, you know, we need to get some good volunteers, people who are willing to do this. I mean, there are consultants like me are a dime a dozen, and they're always willing to come in and give talks to your board because they think they're going to make a lot of money off of you. You know, no, they're not. I mean, don't worry about that. You're not committing yourself to somebody. But get somebody like a Jim Toscana, who worked for 50 years as head of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts and the Minneapolis Heart Institute, and now he's retired and he's just looking for work to do, and he charges $200 to come in and give this sort of speech and then follow up a couple months later and give sort of the same speech. You want to have somebody who can say, this is the reason why we need a good board, and frankly, who can scare some of the dead weight off of your board. You know, as staff people and as good board members, you should be constantly looking for people who would be good for you. Okay? That's a year-round job. Keep those names. Don't count on remembering those names. Keep those names, and frankly, keep those names to yourself. You want to be able to roll those people out when the time is right. Okay? The other piece that you should be looking at, however, is also an advisory group. Okay? And we don't want the advisory group to be advising us on ideas of program. We don't want that. What we want are door openers. Okay? And those door openers don't necessarily have to be people who are doing serious fundraising. You just want them, they don't have to meet. First of all, advisory boards meet groups or resource board committees or resource committees or something like that don't necessarily ever have to meet. They just have to agree that 4 times a year they will open up a door for you. They will introduce you to somebody, they will ask somebody for money, they will help you write a proposal, they will help you figure out who you should be able to talk to at this company or that company. That's their job. It's just 4 times a year they need to do something for you, and it is your responsibility to talk to them and to make that plan rather than them coming to you and saying, okay, I've done my work, here's my report. No, you work with them. And when you need some resource, you need somebody to open up the door, you call them and you say, here's something that I think you'd be interested in. Can you find us somebody at Glenn Taylor's print shop who we can talk to about getting a free brochure? Something like that. Okay? You only want to start with about 5 people on that group. I can send you, if you're interested, I can send you sort of a job description for those folks and where to find those folks and stuff like that. Those are generally people who are really good on other people's boards but would not join your board. So maybe not the chairperson of the hospital board, but maybe one of the vice chairs or one of the secretaries or treasurers of the hospital board. So somebody who has had some experience in fundraising, knows where the money is, does not necessarily feel like they are in a position to run fundraising, but can't help you with some names. Okay? And then some technical expertise. How do you do this fundraising? How do you do the grant writing? How do you, if you're writing if you're writing a federal grant, you really should have somebody who's watching over your shoulder. It's a difficult process. And that might be, hiring somebody, one of your cohort, for $150 just to help you, look through the proposals. That's kind of what I do with a lot of our people. Will there be changes affecting the resources needs? So, last year, Wingspan, it's a great organization. It's a great little organization. They told their development staff, one nice woman, that she had to go from $125,000 a year to $1 million a year. Yeah, and that's what Roberta and I said was, oh my God, that's ridiculous, And they said, well, we need $1 million, And we came back to them and we said, are there resources available for this? No, we're really broke, Well, the woman quit. And so they didn't even raise $125,000 this last year because nobody knew where the files were, And so make sure that if you want to go through $1 million, you can do that. Just make sure that you have the resources and that you have the time. Okay? We talk about 3 different levels of growth. And one is just maintenance. Now, that's a level of growth because, again, you're going to lose about 20% of your funding every year. Okay? So maintenance is just, you go from $300,000 to $310,000, something like that. A lot of organizations are just happy to be able to just meet the rent and a little bit more. Okay? And then there's sustainable growth. Sustainable growth is no more than 20%. Okay? So we're at $300,000 and we want to go to $360,000. Okay? So it's not a big growth, but it's enough to develop a new program, it's enough to develop a new staff person, it's enough to develop some sort of capacity building. There's something here. Okay? This is where we prefer to see people go. This is sort of a cop-out for, it may be that you have no choices in the matter, and I would never call you a cop-out if, things are really going bad and you have a bad board and all that kind of stuff. But if you have a decent board, you should be challenging them to go for a 20% grant. Okay? For a 20% growth. Let's go for something big. And even if you only make it a 345, you're $45,000 ahead. You're still a half a staff person ahead. You're still a half a program ahead. You can still go from there. And then the last piece is, we call it super growth, which is anything more than 30% growth. Okay? So if you're looking at $400,000 or $500,000, you want to go up 30%. I'm not doing the math right here, but super growth is, okay, we really want to explode what we want to do. Okay? That's not a capital campaign, by the way. That's just saying we want to explode. In fact, that's what we call it internally. We call it an explosion campaign. And what that does is that commits you and the board to a year of doing intensive fundraising. Okay? Because up here and here, they really still aren't all that involved in fundraising. But here we say, look, we've got some big plans, we've got some big dreams, we want to know if we can do this. Okay? So we're going to plan a big explosion. It's going to include corporations, it's going to include major donors, it's going to include direct mail, et cetera, et cetera. And we think that we can raise more than 30% of the funding for next year. And our goal is to not only raise it for next year, but then to create the infrastructure, and that's the important piece, create the infrastructure that will drive that for the next few years. It may drop off a little bit, maybe we're only at 25% the year after that, but we have created the infrastructure that says we can do this. Okay? Any questions about that? Those are three very different kinds of growth things, but as you do your budget, this is not the kind of budgeting that executive directors normally do. But you need to be thinking about, as the development director, the person who's in charge of making sure that you get more money in the door, that you can do this. The other advantage of having this explosion campaign is that eventually you're going to lose some funding that you didn't expect to lose. This is more true for human service organizations than it is for cultural organizations, but we do see them, the county cutting back on funding, the state cutting back on funding. We have a client who's at $6 million. They do mental health work. $6 million budget in 2009. Now they're at 3.8. Huge drop. They had to lay off 75 of their folks, and they really don't know where they're going. We had talked to them early on about wanting to do more major donor stuff, and they said, really we're a contract organization. Well, now you're not. Now you're not. You need to be able to think through what's going to happen on the other side of that explosion. What's going to happen when the county stops saying, no, we don't want you taking care of truant kids anymore. So you want to be thinking about how to handle the future. That's more of a super growth sort of a thing. Okay. Let's go through a couple more things. Then we start looking at the recommendations. Of course, we've talked about 4 huge areas here, and we've come up with all different kinds of ideas. What we need you to do then is look at all these different ideas and say, what are the top 3 or 4 priorities in each area? Okay? So maybe we don't want to do a lot of stuff, but maybe one of our recommendations is that we can come up with 3 new proposals next year. Or we can identify 10 new places and go after 3 new proposals. Something like that. So something more doable. Okay? Individuals. Maybe we'll try a house party this year. I think I can talk, Ethel Longstreet into doing a house party for us this year. Let's see if we can get her to invite 10 of her friends, Communications. Maybe we'll turn out, 3 newsletters this year rather than just 2 newsletters, And maybe we'll hire a part-time grant person, or we'll hire somebody 4 hours a week to come in and keep our data records correct. Something like that, What are the ways we can do that? So think realistically about what you can get out of your board, and frankly, out of your manager as well. Okay. If we can't do which priorities have the most positive impacts, what are the financial costs of doing this kind of work? What are the long-term cares of doing this kind of work? And what are the opportunity costs? So if we do decide to go after a major donor campaign this year, what are we giving up? Are we giving up more time on the picnic? Are we giving up more time doing more grants? What are the opportunity costs here?